Let's begin the meeting with a formal welcome. We've got one apology from Steve Emerson. Any other apologies at all, Peter? I think that's it.
No, that's it. Everyone else is here.
Perhaps before we get into the body of the meeting, I think it's probably appropriate that I just say a few words. This is the first public meeting since the untimely passing of Tricia McGregor, MBE. And although we have acknowledged Tricia's passing in other board meetings, and we've had we did have a period of silence at the last quality committee. As this is a public meeting, I think it's entirely appropriate that on the record, I with you, pay absolute thanks to Tricia's contribution both to this board, which has been meritorious over the last nearly 3 years, but also a contribution to the wider NHS as an executive, but also as a speech therapist. And Tricia was also very active in the voluntary sector and in education. And her passing left us with feeling very shocked, and we are very, very sorry indeed with that. But her memory will live on, and the standard she set, particularly within the policy committee, will be a testament to her hard work. So we are in contact with Tricia's family. There will be a suitable occasion to honour her memory, and we're in contact with the family, and we plan to do that in the course of September. And I've shared with you the details from Tricia's recent funeral service, which sadly we could not attend because of current restrictions. Entirely understandable though. Right, let's move on. Are there any other housekeeping announcements, Peter, we need to make? No. Okay, thank you. The raise hand functionality we've discussed. Not everyone's got that, so physically raise your hand, please, if you have a problem getting my attention. We now move on to any declarations of interest. No. Board. We've got the minutes of the previous meeting on the 28th of May. Are you happy that a true and accurate record? Yes. Thank you. Now, any matters arising? Peter, the action log, please.
No, I don't think so, Chairman. As long as the board are content with those actions that we're now recording as closed, the others are for other committees, and they're in progress as reflected in the log. Okay, thank you. Now we move on now to the. Sorry.
Someone's just joined by phone. Can I just suggest that we check who that is?
Is that Cheryl?
Hello, hi, yeah, sorry, it's Cheryl, Inspector from CQC.
Good morning, Cheryl. Nice to welcome to our meeting. Sorry you've got some communication difficulties, but we are receiving you loud and clear by telephone. So,
smashing, thank you.
Please settle down and enjoy the rest of our meeting.
Thank you.
Right, we move on now to the board story. Now this is a short video which we put together regarding our approach in CCAM to inclusion, and I think we let the film speak for itself, and then we'll just have a brief discussion afterwards. So if I could ask Isabel to organise.
Joe, I think it's on mute.
Stand by.
Thanks.
Why is that then?
Joe, on the screen itself, it's got a little mute button next to play.
Yeah.
How does inclusion affect you?
When people make assumptions about my ethnicity based on my skin colour.
The exasperation when people assume I don't have relevant skills and ambition.
The difficulty of progressing with my career when I have a young family.
And the challenge of juggling my full-time career and family life.
It's my anxiety in knowing people get frustrated because of my hearing impairment.
The frustration of having my pronouns assumed rather than being asked. The irritation of being asked, how long have you lived in the UK?
The frustration of people assuming that they know what I am thinking.
the awkwardness of people not understanding that I am unwell just because my illness is invisible to them.
It's the missed opportunity when the views of junior colleagues are less valued.
It's the pressure to fit in. What does inclusion look like?
It is the vision of a better world for our children.
It's about listening beyond the loud voices and making an effort to hear the voices of the seldom heard.
It's about the type of world we want to live in and the choices we make every day.
Inclusion is belonging.
It's about the fact that
7 out of 10 fathers want to work more flexibly.
1 in 3 employers admit they are less likely to hire a transgender person.
Disabled people are significantly more likely to experience unfair treatment at work than non-disabled people.
BME individuals are significantly more likely to experience bullying and harassment in the workplace.
1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem every year.
I pledge to respect everybody.
I pledge to listen to everybody.
I pledge to speak up when I notice something is wrong.
I pledge to make people comfortable enough to be themselves.
I pledge to always be kind.
Diversity ignites creativity, problem solving and innovation.
And team performance improves by 50% when everybody feels included.
Inclusion is not just about ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, disability, culture, age and mental health.
It's about me, it's about you, it's about all of us.
We're all unique.
We all just want a chance to feel valued and respected for who we are.
And for our differences to be embraced as strengths.
All it takes is one.
One person to care, one commitment to act.
Be the one.
Be part of the change that you want to see. Inclusion starts with I.
Excellent. Thank you. Any initial reactions from board colleagues to that?
Wonderful. Well produced. Proud of it.
I think it's stunning. I absolutely stunning.
Yeah, it's really good, and we've had a lot of really positive feedback, I think, and really good involvement from our unions as well in making that, I think. So it's been a great effort, I think, right across the trust in partnership, I think. So it really comes through strongly in the feeling in the video.
Yes, no, absolutely. I was a very say the quality of production certainly helps, but the message is even more important. And by its content, it was inclusive. So that was very, very impressive. And can I just say that it's timely that we've chosen this to introduce our board meeting today. I mean, clearly international events, both in North America, but also issues that have happened in our own country, really do bring the matters of inclusion to the fore. And I think that film just nicely sets the context. It's multi. There are many facets to this in terms of inclusion, and certainly as I think our record as in CCAM has been commendable in this area. But I think it's fair to say there's always room for improvement. And I've agreed to take on the role as board sponsor, board leader for Inclusion Matters, board champion is probably the more appropriate term, to make sure that I act as the sort of the conscience, as it were, of the board. But that's a role I expect all of us to play, but I will certainly lead on that, and to make sure that we continue to be an inclusive organisation in all the facets that we set out in that very excellent film. So I think that sets the context nicely. So thank you for that. So now we move on to the the Chief Executive reports, which in fairness has, I think, as well highlighted Philip's personal stance towards matters of inclusion, which I think is very helpful indeed. So Philip, obviously your story, your report, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Just as a segue, I agree. It's a fantastic piece of visual and enthusiastic and well thought through messaging, but it makes no difference unless we hear the message and do something about it. So it's about action, but I will cover very briefly, and I'll do it now, that that has to be both positive and when there's things that need calling out. And that's the message that we're trying to get down through the executive, that we won't walk past anything, because walking past is doing it if you don't actually stop and do something about it. But also on the positive side, we've got to, as a board, make sure that we are getting our recruiting right, because there's so many things that we can do differently, but we need to have the base of the workforce at all levels, at every level of seniority, so that messages that are really quite difficult to get through are made much easier, because we have a greater understanding of each other. So that's the key to that. But thanks, David, for your leadership in this area. I'm going to start with COVID, as you would expect, and just a quick wrap up of where we are with in the national picture. So the first wave completed, and as lockdown begins to was eased, what we actually saw for us as a trust was that our demand began to pick up again, as lockdown came, having been artificially low during the period of lockdown. During the period of lockdown, we had done an awful lot to ensure staff safety, and some of those measures are still not 100% complete, and I'll come back to the issues of masks and things like that. But so we are trying to change our response to mirror the phase of the outbreak that we're in. So it's important that we understand what phase we're in and what we think is going to happen next. So I think we are in a slight lull between phases. That's how I would probably describe it. The only thing I can't do is tell you just when we will get the next wave and how big it's going to be. So we're having to make sensible planning assumptions on that. But as I'm often quoted as saying, any forecast is going to be wrong in this circumstance. All the models are wrong. It's just a question of us trying to pick the best one that's available, keep our eye on that, and make sure that we're ready for it. For us, if we get winter and wave 2 at the same time, that's probably our worst case, and so that's what we're planning for. And we will continue to do that. Obviously, if you're keeping pace with the news across Europe, we're beginning to see wave 2, or what looks like wave 2, and some of the models are beginning to say, we're wave 2 in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So we're going to have to stay adroit and adept and just meet it as it comes. But I think the approach that we've taken so far is the priority to keep staff safe, so that they're not going to be the carriers of the disease, and that's still the right thing to do. So I'm going to move on and talk about performance. This board is focused on the May performance, and that's as it's planned and as it should be. And it's interesting, but I won't stick to that because May was the period when we were in control completely of our destiny, and we were able to be because the demand was so affected by the lockdown. So it's not only the bald numbers that were down, but the sort of jobs that were missing, the traumas, the accidents, the sorts of things that take more than one resource to deal with, were the things that were missing. So we were able to put out enough hours, and Joe will give you details, enough hours to meet our demand, and with a little bit to spare during that period. So that's reflected in the performance review of the 999, certainly during May. 111 was still recovering in May, and from the real shock that it got in March and April, and the demand was beginning to settle down and come back to some sort of reality. So you had 999 performing really well, 111 recovering, and then coming out of the other side. Call handling, I'm pleased to say, has been excellent throughout the pandemic, and that remains the case. So let's look forward a bit, and I won't go into any detail in this because Joe will pick it up when we get to his bit. But as we have come forward into the last month or so, the lockdown effect is actually ahead of our staff coming back online. So we've still got 150 staff who are self-isolating, and a lot of those are screening, and screening stops at the beginning of next month. But the demand has already arrived, and so we are slightly behind that curve, which is making our performance not as good as it was in May. So we've got some issues, and it's back to our traditional issues, which is the Cat 3s and 4s being longer than we want, and Joe's gradually getting the staff back online in order to get back on top of that. And I'll let Joe pick that up when we get to his point. In terms of PPE and all of those matters, we've talked about this at every board session that we've had and every briefing session, and the situation hasn't changed. We have never been out of PPE. What we did was in April make a decision that the risk to staff was sufficient, that we would say if you were not capable of being fitted to a mask, your face was the wrong shape, or you had some other reason why
now exiting.
The FFP3 masks were not working for you, that we would find alternatives, and until we found you an alternative, that we would take you out of frontline duties. We're still in that position with some staff, and we are bit by bit finding solutions for each individual, but that's still an issue for us. I'm going to move on from performance, talk about clinical education. We had, as I've noted in my report, a really good session with Future Quals, and what that pointed to is and getting a level 1 assurance showed us that we had made significant improvement in that area since the last report, and that's really, really good. There's still a tiny bit to do to close it down, and that will we are in on track to do that. So hopefully the Future Quals will be a thing of the past, but it's I think it is a reflection of the general improvement that we're seeing in clinical education. In the build up to this board, we did get a question coming in. I'm not sure who from, about the quality of the AAP instruction. So I'm going to, at this stage, pick that up because it was prompted by this report, and I'll hand over to Fiona.
Yes, thank you, Philip. So yes, I think we can be assured about the quality of the AAP courses. They are now being delivered by a provider who's been rated as by Ofsted as outstanding. The programs that are being delivered are not new. They are the unchanged training programs. We're just delivering them through a different provider, and they continue to be accredited and governed by the awarding organisation, which is Future Quals. So I think that certainly gives me assurance, Philip, and I hope it gives the board assurance.
Thank you. So that's a specific question, as I say, that came in to us by email. And there was a second question, which I'll come back to Fiona for later. Next, just a quick focus on 111 and the future of 111. We are on track to go live on the 1st of October now with the 111 CAS program that we were awarded some time ago. Remember, this was delayed from April because of COVID. It won't be delayed any further. So even if we get a second wave, the feeling is that we will go ahead with the move to 111 CAS by the 1st of October, because so many other parts of the health system are reliant on it. So David Hammond is leading our efforts there. But I do want to just mention to the board something else that's also changed significantly in the last few months, and that is the appetite for 111 to manage the front door of certainly emergency health more effectively. So this is the thing called Think 111 First. It's being piloted at the moment by SCAS in Portsmouth and in London. There is a very strong feeling that those pilots will be followed up by a range of fast followers, 3 of which will be in our area. And then it will become a national rollout, and we are talking about before Christmas. So I think what we'll do is we'll have to manage that without it affecting the rollout of the 111 CAS service, and then build on top of that. I think that's doable. We don't know the exact ask, obviously. All of that's still to be negotiated, but as a board, we need to keep our eye on it. The absolute priority for us must be to get the 111 CAS in, and if the 111 Think 111 First has to take a slightly second fiddle in that equation, that's the right thing to do, I suspect, and we've got that agreement with all our commissioners and with the region. In terms of inclusion, we made a point about inclusion during the intro and the excellent film. One thing that isn't in my report, because it's only happened since I wrote it, is that the talent, inclusion and diversity evaluation, the TIDE evaluation, it's an annual awards which we submit a case for, and we've done fairly well in the past. But I'm delighted to tell the board that in the last few days we have been awarded a gold award for this year for our submission and the work. So that's really, really good, and the inclusion team have done a great job to provide the evidence of the good work that we're doing that has led to that gold award. So that's really good. I'm moving on to some successes and some, I'm pleased to say, some leadership that we have been able to be involved in the clinical and patient care arena. And I want to recognise the work of Alan Cowley, particularly a paramedic in the work on spinal injuries. We've had a question from the board, for the board, about this. That, again, coming in from someone who I don't know who's asked it, but the question was essentially, has that guidance got out to the rest of the system, or is it just guidance that's available to us? Fiona?
Thanks, Philip. So yes, when we initially produced this guidance, we worked very closely with the 3 major trauma networks that we have in our area. That's South East London, Kent and Medway, Sussex, and South West London and Surrey. So the trauma networks were all fully supportive of the changes, and agreed to cascade it to all the trauma units and local emergency hospitals. So I'm assured that that has happened. We also worked with our colleagues in RNLI, the Fire and Rescue Service, Search and Rescue, so that they were also aware. And of course, our colleagues in Kent, Surrey, Sussex Air Ambulance Trust were incredibly supportive of these changes, and we work very closely with them, as we always do. Thank you.
While I'm talking about clinical leadership, delighted to see individuals in our workforce doing bits and pieces. An example of which is Danny Hughes using a mobile phone app to help people who are hearing impaired to get over the fact that they're being treated by people in masks. It's not the finished product by any means, but it's great that our staff have got the confidence to try new things to help patients, because that's what it's all about, and that's what we've been, as a board, been aspiring to, where we become a place where people have the confidence at every level to do things to make life better for patients. So I'm going to sort of wrap up there, Chair, and just say that I'm really pleased with the way in which we've handled COVID so far. We've got challenges to come, and that is getting workforce out on the road in sufficient numbers to deal with a projected second wave and the winter at the same time. But really good. It's been managed really well so far.
Thank you, Philip. That's a very comprehensive report and a very positive one as well. Board colleagues, any questions you wanted to raise? We'll bring up performance matters later on in the agenda, but other than the performance issues, are there anything you'd wish to seek further information for the Chief Executive on? Laurie? Well, you're on mute, Laurie.
Could I afterwards, Chair?
Yeah, Michael. Yeah.
In 413, Philip, you talk about our all of the effort going into learning from COVID. And I think it's phenomenally powerful what you're doing. But I just wondered, are we going to see anywhere how CCAM's learning fits with the national picture across the NHS, and most particularly with the learning of other ambulance trusts? It would be interesting to see. Is that possible for us?
David, I think that David's leading on our learning. There are two things. It's not only across the NHS, but really specifically, it's in the ICSs that we are part of, and we are completely tied in with their learning and recovery plans. But if I'm brutally honest, most of theirs are about the difficult or the challenges that they had that we haven't had, turning off services, turning them back on. But there is an awful lot that we will be involved in, and I'm thinking along the lines of GPs are going to be forever doing a lot more video consultations. The 111 first thing that I was talking about, that's another piece of learning. So all of those are coming out bit by bit, and we are involved in them. Whether we produce a paper that tries to tie it all together or not is a good thought, and one that that we'll take forward in EMB and as part of our learning board. David, anything you wanted to add?
I'm sure, before I bring in David Hammond, I'm sure Bethan will raise it in the next session, but what I'm certainly aware of is the work we've done with our other ambulance trusts in establishing best practice in this area. And I think we've got my impression is we have a commendable record there, which we have shared with other ambulance trusts in terms of the way we handle the COVID emergency, but others more expert in that than me. David Hammond, you're leading our recess and recovery programme. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, just really to endorse what Philip said. I think as ambulance services, restoration and recovery is not something we've had to focus on particularly. So we are able to focus on the learning and improvement element of it, and we've deliberately set it up in that way. We do link in with our system partners around our 4 ICSs, and they have programs which are running at different speeds. But as Philip said, it's very much linked to recovery of services as opposed to what improvements you can make. obviously there's an impact in that, and as they start to develop those things and get into system reconfigurations and so forth, which plays into the ICS agenda anyway, you know, we're linked into those conversations. Ambulance services nationally, we do through various groups that we all sit on nationally as well, whether that be finance or operations or CEO. I think the reality is the experiences, while there are some shared experiences, there are some very different approaches and different responses required. So yeah, London particularly had a very, very difficult period that we didn't experience in quite the same way. So it's about learning from that, but also supporting in those ways. So and I think the national picture is an interesting one, to your point, Laurie. So sitting on the Southeast CFOs Forum, there's a lot of concern around what the next 7 months bring in terms of the financial position and therefore the services that can be delivered. And a lot of that is driven by the frameworks that they're intending to put in, which they still haven't declared to us yet. So I think we're linked into where we need to be linked in. We're taking the positives and the learnings from it, and it will continue to report to the board. And I know it's on the paper that Bethan will present next, sort of a bit more of a detailed look as to what we are actually doing as well.
Right, but without taking the chair, let's rise to the challenge though, where we can share our learning with a larger organisation. We have a lot to be proud of. We've been very honest as well when we face challenges. So let's look for an opportunity to do some joined up working with our colleague organisations to perhaps produce a publication if necessary, because I think there is a lot to share. So questions from Michael, then Lucy. Michael?
Yeah, please, Philip, thank you. I thought the paper was excellent, very clear and concise, and gave the right levels of assurance. I've just got 2 questions. I'm interested that it is clear that I don't think we will go to another national lockdown, but we've now seen the example of Leicester and Oldham. I just wondered, drawing on Laurie's point about learning, if we faced a similar issue within the CCAM footprint, given that we run our services in quite an integrated way, have we got the protocols in place about how we might respond to a more localised lockdown, say in Sussex or Kent? And then I've got a second question, if I may. Really welcome the emphasis that you're giving to the future direction of 111. It was interesting to read in the press on Tuesday about the joint meeting of NHS Improvement and NHS England, where the emphasis, as it was recorded in the press, was by Christmas, the entry into the NHS will be through 111. That's quite a major step forward, and I do wonder whether nationally we have planned for that as well as the system seems to think, because there could be wider unintended consequences around that. So, for example, if you get a sudden increase in demand, it's the whole issue of public transport and the delivery of public transport comes into the equation. And I wondered, are we as I suppose I'm just re-endorsing your point. We need to plan for this very carefully, because I think there are significant unintended consequences that have not yet been realised. So I'm very positive about it, but I'm quite nervous. So I don't know if that's a question or an observation, but if you could, any comments on those 2 points, please. Local lockdowns.
Philip, you might want to respond, but also Joe might want to come in regarding the steps we're taking in contingency planning for the future. Philip?
So shall I just answer that, and then we'll go on to the other questions. Local lockdowns. I talked to the guys who had local lockdowns in their areas, and actually the impact on the ambulance service is not great, because we're just carrying on to do our normal 999 business. So we don't need to change the 999 business. The 111 business won't be affected, we think, from the evidence of the other local lockdowns, in the same way as it was with the first lockdown, i.e. a huge spike of concern, although you do get a small spike. So it's about managing a small spike of demand, but and we have got the capacity to do that. If you look at our 111 performance in terms of call answer and abandonment rate, we are at the top of the national tree, roughly, or we're in pace with the top of the national tree, and that's because we built in that bit of redundancy. In terms of the second question, which was, remind me, just give me one line.
Sorry, I'm just interested in the move to, if everybody is beginning to plan attendance. Yeah. There are wider attendance.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Front door of the NHS. Everybody is. So, is there a perfect plan that has been thought out years ahead and resourced and all of that sort of stuff? The answer is obviously no. It's learning from something. It's actually grabbing an opportunity that COVID has produced, and that came from other bits of the NHS suddenly realising that having someone else control their flow is a good thing rather than a bad thing. Pre-COVID, it was almost impossible to persuade a GP surgery or let alone a hospital to give 111 control of their access. Now everybody wants it, so that's a good thing. But as you say, the consequences of that are significant, and everyone's aware of the consequences. So where this is being brought in, it's being brought in to say we will be the front door of the NHS by Christmas, I think would be overstating it by some significant margin. I think everyone's being relatively sensible with the way that they're being brought in. So the 2 pilots that are running are only taking about 10% to 15% of the total front door type demand that might come our way. And we're doing that because you can't do it all at once, and you wouldn't want to. So it's a gradual change that will happen, and it is being planned for rather than it is planned, is what I would say.
Thank you. Joe, is there anything you wanted to add as you're leading our operational response at the moment?
Just to add, thank you, Chair, that our emergency planning teams are clearly scanning the horizon, looking for anything that might impact us as we go forward. So we're looking at everything from planning events, and there are lots of planning events to look at how various areas are likely to react if they have local lockdowns. So there's an awful lot of engagement out there with the emergency planning teams on looking at how various areas may well react. And we're also looking at the other end of the scale, really, is some of the unplanned events that also crop up as well and may well impact us. And we've, as an example, whilst there was this coming weekend in Brighton, there was an event that was cancelled, which was Brighton Pride, which is still effectively going ahead with the people that are turning into Brighton. So we're constantly looking at both ends of the spectrum, from lockdown to escalation as well.
Can I just add to that, Chair? So, Michael, in answer to your question and further to Joe's, yes, we have a process. Yes, it's approved. It's been through all governance routes around local lockdown. Does it consider all staff implications? Because absolutely, Philip's right around operational implications being relatively low. Staffing wise, though, it does have more implications. So, yes, we've considered those. We have a detailed plan. It's on the shelf ready to pull and go. And we've also considered it in light of potential localised lockdowns in relation to quarantine. So I know we're seeing it abroad at the moment, but we're looking as well. We also have a plan now approved in relation to lockdowns if they happened in the UK. So if we were to have staff on holiday places in the UK and local quarantine was brought in. So all of those things, absolutely. And we can share any of those if the board requested them.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thanks very much indeed. Lucy, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. My question was around the issue that we're having around getting the operational hours we need, and later on in the pack it's clear you can see the impact of that. What I did want to ask about is private ambulance providers, because we do rely on them for a reasonable proportion of hours. Are we seeing what we are experiencing reflected in them, and are there any actions we can do to try and mitigate that by bringing extra providers on, etc.?
Thank you, Lucy. So we have been working with 2 providers in particular to give them a more substantial contract for them to base their resourcing on, so that they have a longer contract rather than just the initial year that we had. That has meant that we've actually had to say to others that we're only going to offer them a more ad hoc arrangement, but that decision was based around the performance and the productivity of those particular teams. So we're working with them, but what we've had to also look at then is the anticipated workforce growth through the year and how we balance that by the end of the year as well. So that's been a consideration within that planning and that particular approach.
Thank you. We'll pick that up later as well in the performance section. I think next was Laurie. You wants to come in?
No, it's okay. All I was going to say was that just to talk to Michael's point about the longer term impact of a shift to something like 111 first, that we are sort of strategy assessment process, which we're running the first stage of as a board in late August, is exactly the kind of thing we need to pick up in order to understand the dynamics of our operating environment. So Joe's talked about it at an emergency planning team level. I think we'll be able to look at perhaps a slightly more general and longer horizon, longer time scale. So we should be on to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think finally, David Howard.
Thanks, David. Yeah, just on both the points from Michael and Laurie. So, and again, just to endorse what Philip was saying. So the commissioners in our 2 ICSs where we're providing 111 CAS services from the 1st of October are very aware also that this is something which has been brought in nationally and is very new. So they are working with us very well, and we're working very closely with them as a system to make sure that we are preparing something which can be delivered, but also we understand the consequences of that for each and every provider in the system as a whole. So, you know, for example, Think 111 First relies on endpoints for each acute hospitals, which talk to, via a technological link, every service that's in part of that Think 111 First process. And obviously those things, whilst they can be done, as you say, Laurie, in the longer term, you know, we need to be as pragmatic as we need to be to make the system work best without trying to sort of boil the ocean in one go. I do think it leads to some huge opportunities, and as a system player, we will be part of those around what this could look like in a few months and probably years' time. And they're the conversations that will also start. But obviously, we need to prioritise what we do first. I was just going to add as well, the other thing which we are very aware of and are fully planning for, particularly with our location in the southeast, both on 111 but also on a general resilience, is of course EU exit, which is coming along at a rate of knots, somewhat under the radar, I think, with COVID and other things which are the main news stories. But of course, our plans were well developed for the previous attempts. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'll call it attempts. And obviously, we know that there is a finite date on this. So I know Joe's EPRR team, as you referred to, are working hard at this, but we're also bringing it into the conversations with commissioners about both our 999 service and the mobilisation of 111. And it goes to Michael's point, because it's really, really important with winter, EU exit and everything else coming at around the same time along with COVID. We need to make sure that we are aware of all those points and managing it as a system player.
Thank you. Before we move on, I think it's worth noting, as we are in a public meeting, I think the public can take some assurance from that discussion we've just had. Not only are we transacting clinical policy improvements across a range of clinical networks across the southeast of England with the spinal injuries example, which I thought was a very good example of that, but also in the work we are doing with the ICSs and with other public sector partners in our contingency planning for EU exit and other events. I think that really shows how we're being outward facing. So that's, you know, I think I commend you all, what the executive team and what all your teams are doing in that area. And thank you for that. Let's move on to the next item, which is the COVID response, and including the Infection Control Assurance Framework. So Bethan, you're going to take us through that?
Yeah, thanks, David. So this paper is a COVID assurance paper for the COVID governance arrangements that we have in place. So I'll talk through the main points from the COVID management group, our operational management group, and I'll pass to David then to talk through the recovery, learning and improvement aspects. Essentially, I haven't repeated in this paper what I said in the paper at the last board in May, which was how the committees work, how they'd been formed, etc., because we've covered all that, but obviously happy to take any questions on those if needed. But just to give you assurance, both committees have continued in the same vein since the last meeting. We've now at COVID Management Group covered nearly 2,500 items of scrutiny. It's a massive industry in itself, as you can see by that large number, and I've included in the paper the numbers of actions and decisions that we're looking at. So just to point out before I move on to the specific significant issues that we've tackled since the last meeting, just to point out again that this is an additional governance layer. All trust governance still applies. So all of the things that we discuss, decide, take action on have been through existing trust governance. So things like quality impact assessments, data protection impact assessments, finance business case processes, etc. We are not skirting any governance at all. This is in addition to. So I've just covered in the paper for you the key things that have happened since the last board paper. Firstly, staff testing, and Philip's touched on this in his paper as well, but we had a really successful programme of both antibody testing, so venous blood sample antibody testing, which I think many of us on the screen took advantage of as well, and PCR swab testing. So we exceeded our trajectory that we had submitted nationally around this, and we saw results of approximately 14% of the samples that we took for antibody testing showing positive for antibodies. This is absolutely in line with the national NHS picture that people are seeing. So the NHS picture is slightly higher than antibody levels that's seen in the general population, but it is in line with our NHS system colleagues. So at the moment, we are not undertaking any routine asymptomatic staff testing. We are only doing, referring people for testing if they're symptomatic. We're not currently doing any asymptomatic testing, but we will be now doing that on a symptomatic basis. So by that I mean if we have an outbreak in a particular area in the trust, and an outbreak is nationally defined as 2 cases, we then will be testing the people within that locality. And actually, as we speak now, there is a tabletop exercise going on about exactly who we would need to test in those scenarios, how wide that testing would need to go. So clearly that's work that's ongoing. So I've pretty much covered the next point as well, because that's the outbreak management that's being tested today. But there is a national requirement for us as a trust to provide an internal test and trace cell 16 hours per day, 7 days a week. And that went live on Monday this week. So we are absolutely assured that we have that in place. And once we've got this outbreak management plan approved, we will be fully compliant with all the national requirements there. The role of volunteers, I'm really pleased to say that the COVID Management Group approved the reinstatement of CFRs a little while ago for C1s, and then last week to C2s and C3s. So fantastic news. Obviously, that's in accordance again with all normal governance, so PPE being available, fit testing, risk assessments being done if required, etc. And we also approved the reinstatement of chaplains being able to visit trust sites, and that again was incredibly well received. So really 2 really good positive measures, and we were able to do that in the main because of the more positive picture around PPE, which had been a concern for us in the past about needing to keep all of our available PPE for our staff on the front line. I won't cover in detail the REAP level, that's in there for your information, but we do review it every single meeting. Again, I won't cover the tactical and strategic plan in detail. So just on staff risk assessments, there's a national requirement to undertake risk assessments for our BAME staff, so our Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, our clinically vulnerable staff, and that's a nationally defined cohort of people, those who have received official shielding letters, or those who have a household member who has received an official shielding letter. And then there are 2 further categories, which I'm going to try and get right, but I'm pretty sure Ali's going to tell me I get the last one wrong in a minute. The 3rd category, which we are moving on to work on now, is all males employed within the organisation. And then the last category is working well women under 70 not pregnant. Have I forgotten anything, Ali?
Under 60.
Under 60. Ah, see,
Yeah.
I was nearly there. I'm notorious for getting that definition wrong, so apologies. So we have done really well with our BAME risk assessments, 98%, and we expect to get to 100% this week. Our clinically vulnerable, we yesterday were at 59%, and we are pushing really hard to get that to 80% this week, which is where we really want to get to as an organisation to report on. We will be starting the male risk assessments during the month of August and aim to get them all done during that month. And we're just working up the timeline and the tool for the last category, which I won't say again. So, an incredible amount of hard work going into that at the moment. So I think that's all I was going to cover on the key decisions. And then just lastly from me, before I hand over to David, you've got a separate attachment to your papers today, which is the Ipc Assurance Framework. This is a national framework all trusts were required to undertake from NHS England. It was obviously, I'll just point out, written at a point in time. So you can see some of the comments such as antibody testing. It says we're about to start it. Clearly we finished it, but obviously the document was written at a specific point in time. It essentially is a comprehensive review of where we are in relation to IPC. As you can see, there are no gaps in assurance. So we worked really hard, obviously, around this. And I know QPS and the extraordinary QPSs we've had have been cited on all of those elements throughout it. It was reviewed at COVID Management Group and the Exec Management Board. And we also discussed it with the CQC, who asked us to discuss it with them and share it with them at our recent assurance meeting. So it's here today for the board to note and to seek assurance from. Okay, so I'll hand over to David. Sorry, David. Yes, sir. Then
I'll bring in Terry for the first question. But,
okay.
Do you want to go ahead with your piece, David?
Yeah, thanks, David. So again, as with Beth, and I won't go through anything that we've already gone through at the May board meeting in terms of the frameworks and the structure of the Recovery, Learning and Improvement Group. It's deliberately set up with those three titles. But as we've already covered previously in the meeting, we feel that the recovery and the recovery element is probably the smallest, and the opportunity lies in the other two. We've also deliberately set it up with senior management representation rather than executive representation. So with the exception of Ali, everybody who sits on it regularly is not part of the exec team, and that's deliberate because the outputs of this will be driven by the senior leaders of the organisation, and some of them will take some of the decisions and some of the projects that will come out of this will take a significant amount of time to embed, and therefore, actually they can own this from inception to completion in lots of ways. And I think that's a really positive statement of not only intent and the way that we choose to run the organisation, but obviously it gives them empowerment to take something forward. The group has, so on the recovery phase, we have reviewed the 400 plus decisions made by CMG and used what we sort of lovingly call an adopt, adapt, abandon approach. So we discuss each of the decisions via each work stream. So there's 10 different work streams which were presented last time, so I won't go through them all. Each of the work streams is allocated is allocated the decision from CMG. They discuss that and then they decide if it's something we want to keep or whether it was purely COVID related, and therefore in the new world, when we get there, the new normal, that is something that is purely COVID related, in which case it goes on the shelf in the contingency planning team, just in case we need to bring it out next time. So as well as that, we've also looked at the trust response, where we may not have made a decision, but actually it's changed the ways that we do things. So for a simple example might be the way we deliver clinical education, which we always used to do in person. Due to circumstance, we've had to deliver it virtually, and therefore there's an opportunity there for that work stream to have a look at how we do it. Similarly, there's the new ways of working. So we've had to, by default, have corporate staff and others working from home remotely via Teams, as we're doing the board meeting on today. That's given us a huge opportunity, and something which was possibly aspirational, but in the too difficult pile. It's given us an opportunity to look at that and bring that forward and develop that. So I thought it might be useful for Ali to give his reflections on the new ways of working, which is the work stream he actually leads, just to give the board a flavour of the kind of stuff that we're looking at and how we're making some of those we're having some of those thoughts, I'll then come back in and talk about how we're making decisions and how it aligns with our governance processes to give the board assurance on that. So Ali, I don't know if you want to.
Thank you. And we just keep an eye on the time as well, just to make sure we don't slip too far behind. Ali?
Yeah, no, just briefly, I think so the points that you just heard from Beth and David, I think, are well made. The interesting thing with the new ways of working group, which is the work stream I'm chairing, is that we've done quite a lot of learning, I think, actually, in terms of the decisions that we've made already as a trust. And so we've gone through and reviewed each of those individually. To give you a practical example of one, I think, is that it was only just a few weeks before lockdown started that we were worrying about car parking at Nexus House, for example. And of course, the whole lockdown process has actually completely changed that. So we're now thinking very differently about how staff work and how they work away from the workplace. So our biggest piece of work so far is in two parts. The first bit we've done is around people who are really struggling working at home, because there is a natural assumption that everybody's got sort of good facilities, they're coping well, they have nice working environments at home and they can do this. But actually we found that a number of staff haven't got that. So we've made arrangements for those people to come in and be able to use some workspace in the short term. And the longer piece of work, which we're just kicking off now, is around agile working. So it's something I think the NHS has grappled with for many years, but actually really hasn't dealt with strategically. So I think this is providing a sort of really amazing opportunity, I think, to have a look at that. And as you see from national data on this, 80% of people are quite keen to carry on working from home when you look at sort of like some of the surveys being done now. So I think it's how we actually do these things positively for the 450 staff who we have currently working remotely. Just one final thing on this is that we're also going to be looking at how not just corporate staff are working, but also in terms of our operating units, where we have admin staff who are based in operating units, how can they work differently as well? So it's not an exclusive thing to people who, if you like, are in corporate teams. It's actually right across the piece. We'll need to look at this.
Yeah. Thank you. Commend the inclusive approach there.
David, may I just really quickly, appreciating the time, I think it's really important for board assurance that we just touch on the governance and how we're doing this as well. Yeah. So this has full support of our PMO process, which is well established and we know is very good. I think the way to think about the learning and improvement piece is it's almost a think tank. So it's a place to generate ideas and project initiation documents, for want of to finish the sentence off with a word. At that point, what comes out of that then follows our normal and approved trust governance processes. So we would still come up with a series of plans, which we will then put through the relevant quality committee, business case process, exec management approval if it hits the triggers and so forth. So it's very controlled, but actually we want to try and run the group in quite a free-flowing way to generate the ideas and take the learning as a positive experience, because obviously COVID has some very negative consequences, and we want to ensure that we're building from them, not sort of wallowing in them, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much, Leader. We've been asked to note the report, but before we do, just give a chance for board members to seek assurance that they're content with the report. So Terry, you were first with your hand up.
Yeah, two things, David. One is to just say how impressed I've been with this whole process of management of the COVID situation. It's not just the governance. The governance, I think, has been exemplary. But the way that the senior team has not only managed it internally, but also externally, and the way that we've kept involved as a group, as a board, I think has been very impressive. For me, though, all of this only comes down to one thing, and that's the learning from it, that people have been incredibly busy. And the chief exec spoke earlier about whether we've got a second wave coming or the first wave hasn't finished. For me, the key thing is when cases increase, how has the learning from this process impacted on what we've done? And for me, one of the most interesting things is the antibody testing. So, with 1 in 7 of our staff testing positive for antibodies, that feels significantly lower than the number of confirmed cases that we've had of COVID-19. And I'm just wondering what the correlation has been between the numbers we believe to have been infected and the numbers that actually have shown antibodies.
Thank you, Terry.
Really good question. Do you want me to? Yeah, because I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head, so I'll be completely honest about that. I think that's a really excellent question, Terry, that I saw you sent it to me as well on the chat function. I'm going to find out. So what we are doing is correlating localities and things like that, and looking at pockets with people that live geographically or work geographically, but that isn't something we've done. So I'm going to take that away because I'm really interested in that as well. So apologies, don't know off the top of my head.
And the reason I asked it is quite specific. Firstly, it means we've got a resource. We've got 1 in 7 staff who are likely to have a level of immunity when the next wave or when the increase comes. But if you look at the literature around the testing regime for the actual virus, the swabbing, it seems that the efficiency of the swabbing regime was very varied. That when it was done by clinicians, it seemed to be quite effective. But what we need, I think, as we go into the new wave is to be really clear as to, if it is our responsibility to test staff, we need to be very clear as an organisation what methodology is the most effective. And it feels to me, looking at the literature, that testing run by clinicians has been far more effective than self-testing. But we need a view on that, I think, so that we can respond rapidly if numbers start to increase.
It's unsurprisingly, and Fiona's got a hand up, so I'm going to pass to Fiona, that she and I have debated this ad nauseum and at COVID management group, haven't we, Fiona?
Fiona, let's do a clinical view before we bring Al into the next question. Let's conclude that matter. Yeah. Fiona?
It's firstly just to respond to the PCR testing. Intuitively, we absolutely feel that a clinician doing the swabbing will produce more accurate results. However, we've been back over this a couple of times and looked at the underlying evidence, which suggests that self-swabbing is good enough. So that's the way this has been. Our research and development team have gone over the literature a couple of times just to see if anything new has emerged. Just a couple of words of warning around the antibody testing results. So 14% of our staff have tested positive, which is in line with other ambulance services, with the exception of London, where 27% of their staff have tested positive. And I think that is in line with the massive surge that they had there, the huge pressure that there was on their staff, probably the higher exposure to viral load, and some of the issues that they saw around PPE for their staff. And finally, we don't know that a positive antibody test equals immunity. There's some evidence that if you aren't that ill, you may not develop an antibody response. And there is no certainty that having antibodies will protect you. It does show that you've had the infection and mounted an antibody response. But what it doesn't tell us is whether you're immune. It would be lovely to think that you were, but we don't know that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Dace. Thank you. Al.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think to David Hammond, really, on the recovery, learning and improvement side, there's obviously, I think it's great that we're using the senior leader level, and you've explained why and how the governance works beyond that. There are, by the sounds of it, lots of individual initiatives that could come out of this. And I just wonder how we're going to step back from that and look at where actually they point towards a more strategic issue, which might be to do with the way we frame our services in the future. And one way of assuring the board on that might be to do something a bit more like we've seen from the COVID management group, of a summary of key initiatives arising, decisions being reached, but an opportunity for us to sit down maybe at the next board meeting and look at what's arising and whether there are strategic issues out of it.
Yeah, it's a great point, Al, and one we're thinking about constantly. So each of the work stream has a senior leader as so a couple of things in answer to that. So each work stream has a senior leader heading it up, who then sits on the learning and improvement group, which I chair. But within those work streams, there's full participation from lots and lots of staff. Two of the key golden threads that run through it, or three of the key golden threads that run through it, and therefore aren't work streams in their own rights, are communications with the organisation, staff engagement as a complete work stream, so that we make sure these aren't great ideas thought up in a ivory tower somewhere. These actually come up from the ground. And then lastly, how this all aligns or doesn't to our strategic delivery plan and our revised strategy or our refreshed strategy, because clearly if there's stuff coming out from the bottom of the organisation that we haven't captured in the strategy, then we've probably got it slightly wrong. I'm very pleased to say that so far we have pretty much alignment. We're a 4,000 person organisation, so we're never going to have it quite right. But in terms of themes, we are very aligned. So our next step now for the Learning and Improvement Group, bearing in mind it's only 3 months old, is to do exactly what you've just said and kind of pull all this together now, pull all the relevant parts together, align it to our strategy or work out where it doesn't align, do that gap analysis, and then we will start sort of developing the project plans in more detail, at which point it can take on more of a drumbeat like the COVID management group, where we're starting to get to sort of clear outputs. Whereas at the moment, as I said earlier, we're kind of in that think tank phase at the moment, where we want to really breed everyone's energy and want to see what the answer really needs to be. And then once we agree what the answer is, we work out how we then deliver it and align it to everything else.
It just makes me wonder whether at the right moment, in the same way that we've had a NED aligned to a number of key projects for the trust, whether it would be an opportunity to get a NED alongside your group at your level, David, to help with that process.
Yeah, absolutely, very much welcome it. The input and the experience would be greatly welcomed and really well received, I think.
Thank you. And can I just encourage board committee chairs as well? I know that our response to COVID has been involved. Every committee has considered our response and the impact. We continue to ask the questions in those committees regarding what they're learning, what we can put into David's process to ensure that we do round all this up and make sure we move forward in a coordinated way. So I think from what we've heard, colleagues, I think the board can take assurance that the COVID response and our Ipc Assurance Framework has been both well led, but actually has been commendably carried out by executive colleagues. And I think we can take some assurance from our governance process. I thought at one point Terry was saying governance, but I think we say governance. I think I was hearing an incorrect word. So we will take.
I was definitely saying governance, David. Definitely saying
our governance process. And commend all those that have been involved, but also continue the spirit of learning and being open and honest as we have been. When we think we can do things better, we've said so. So I just really commend that we continue in that light. Right, let's move on now, please. We made to the integrated performance reports, a new and improved integrated performance report, which the Chief Executive is going to introduce.
Thank you very much. So I'm not going to say that much. There's a bit in the front page from me about the background to this, but a couple of points about it. One, it is a work in progress. So we there are still this is the first time we produced it in public, and there are still bits that we're working on. So very happy to when we get on to the questions to hear about what people think about it, but perhaps more useful if that's done offline with suggestions about how it can be improved. But keep the questions to the content. One thing I did want to point out is that the team that designed this have done it with lots of things in mind, and down to small things like the colour scheme is deliberately, it may not suit your eyes, but it is deliberately suited to people with visual impairments. So it's gone to that sort of length, and I think it's a really good start. There are some issues with the way data is presented in certain places, and people can point that out when they get to their patches, and those are just small corrections still to be made. But I think it's a really good start. I think that it tells a good picture about the trust, or wrong. It gives an accurate picture about quite a lot of the trust. Rather than the good. Hopefully it will be accurate. Hopefully it'll be good. But the important thing is that it's accurate and representative of what's actually happening. With that said, I think, Chair, I'll hand over to Bethan, who will take you through her section.
Thanks, Philip. So I'm going to cover the safe section. So that's slides 12 to 15 of the new IPR. And I've been trying to find some things to pull out as exceptions, but I'm really pleased to say that actually I don't have very much to pull out from a negative perspective or a worsening picture this month. I just want to highlight a couple of things we're doing really well, because otherwise I think with IPRs there's the risk of only our eyes going straight to the reds. So just two really great levels of compliance for me. Firstly, duty of candour is at 100% compliance, so that's great. So we know we've had struggles in the past around that. We thought we'd fixed it. We had a blip, but we're consistently seeing excellent performance in that now. So I just wanted to point that out. And then secondly, hand hygiene compliance. So again, that's back up to its 95% target. And as Lucy will know, as chair of QPS, we had seen a dip in that earlier, or a few months ago, and we're back up at compliance there, which is absolutely fantastic to see, particularly obviously given that we're in a global pandemic. The one thing I do just want to flag is the data on safeguarding training. So that's showing at 35.6%. Now, I think quite a few of us will say at this point, under mandatory training, of course, you'll see when it's graphically illustrated, a massive drop from March to April. And that's because, of course, our training year goes from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So a lot of people will have done their training, so me included, during February, March this year. And so I'm not going to then do it again in April, May this year. So we're never going to see that immediately at the compliance level from the 1st of April. So what we're looking to do there with the data is move that to a rolling year, so that you'll see compliance as the year progresses, a rolling 12-month year. But I think that's the same for a few of us in our training data. So actually 35% isn't bad for only 1 month in for the requirements there. We have been encouraging corporate staff in particular, if they have spare capacity, to undertake their statutory training at this time. So that was all I was going to say under the safe domain. There's no other areas of escalation for me, and I think I'm going to hand over to Fiona for the effective. You're on mute, sorry Fiona.
Sorry, before we do, any questions from Bethan on that section, to Bethan on that section of the report? Howard, did you want to ask a question? Or?
I just wanted to sort of say generally, not on that specific section, but just generally, I thought the IPR was, this new version is really excellent step forward. As you suggest, I think I've certainly got a number of comments in terms of presentation and style that will make it even better, and I'll do that outside of the board. But one of the things that I think is covered, and you mentioned, is about the timing of the data and the information, because obviously we're sitting here in July looking at May numbers, which is a concern for me. And I think the aim was to try and move that to perhaps 1 month behind, which would be more normal. So towards the end of the month, you're looking at the previous month. And then certainly I would encourage that, so that what we're looking at is more current than these statistics. And you know, to the extent that obviously some of them are just simply not available, that's fine. But the ones that are available, let's have the latest data. It'd be fantastic. But I think the whole thing is a fantastic step forward. It's a really good report. Yeah, I've got a few specific comments as we go through, but my style and general comments I'll send separately.
Thank you. We're picking it up.
Well done to the team for. I know it's a lot of effort. I've done similar sorts of things before. There's a lot of effort's gone into it. I think it's really great.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a very inclusive piece of work, and I know the executive are on the case regarding making information more real time, and that's something which is top of the list. So we've no further questions on. Lucy.
Bethan, as you say, we're in a pandemic, and it is really good to see the hand hygiene compliance come back, and we have benefited from almost a free communications campaign over the past months, which is helpful. What I do think we should look at, and I was going to suggest we did it in QPS at the next meeting, but I think would be worthwhile having here, is around vehicle cleanliness as well, because that's the other side of the coin, and it is an area where we have struggled traditionally. So I think it would be important to have that here, but also let's take it to QPS in September.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I'll take that forward from an IPR perspective, and I agree. I've seen your comments for the agenda, and I think we should take that in September. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to effective.
Thanks, Chair. There's just one item that I wanted to highlight under SAFE, which is around the ongoing audits of medicines management, which is 100% for May. And if you look at the background information, has varied between 90 and 100%. So that's really reassuring in terms of making sure that our drugs are in date and being managed safely. In terms of the effective metrics, the ones that I wanted to highlight are on slide number 8 and more detail on slide 16. So the cardiac arrest return to spontaneous circulation for the Utstein group was 33% in May, which is down, but that's a figure that varies from month to month. In fact, that was April data, because we're always a little behind in getting that data together. All the diagnostic bundles that we monitor have shown a pleasing increase, although you'll notice on slide 8 that there is a decreasing metric for the STEMI care bundle, but the overall picture there is of an improved compliance to the care bundles. And this is really down to the use of the electronic patient care record. And since that was introduced, we've seen a gradual increase in the documentation of the care bundle, which translates into better care for patients, which is great. I wanted to highlight a metric which you probably haven't come across before, which is the Ecal mean response time. So Ecal stands for Emergency Call Advice Line. And this is when our crews on scene contact a more senior clinician in one of the paramedic practitioner hubs. And we monitor now on a day-to-day the number of hubs in operation, the number of callbacks that we get, and crucially, the time it takes for our clinicians in the hubs to call the patient back. And a figure of 24 minutes is clearly too long, but it's something that we are monitoring, and it's now down to well under 20 minutes. And in fact, most recently was 11 minutes. That contributes both to shared decision making, but also ratifying the decision to either transfer the patient to a specialised centre or perhaps to leave them in the community with worsening advice. So there's more detail around each of the metrics on page 16, which just shows a bit more detail. But those are the highlight items that I would like to bring to your attention. I think the only other thing to say is that the stroke and STEMI call to hospital data has been paused because of the COVID outbreak. So there's no data from November 2019. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. Colleagues, questions to seek assurance on the effective?
I just had a question on the benchmarking slide, sort of page 33 and 34, and it was around a sort of cardiac arrests discharged alive, both the overall and the Utstein group. When we present statistics like this, you know, it's difficult to interpret them. But when you look at that, you know, we are the lowest performer there against our comparators. And the question arises as to why, and is there anything systematic or that we should be doing as a result of seeing that statistic? So we present the benchmark and then we show ourselves on that particular one as the lowest. Is there anything we should be doing differently?
So I think, Howard, this is where it's important to look at the cardiac arrest annual report, because inevitably the numbers of survivors is really small in each of these groups, and one additional survivor can have a significant impact on the survival figures. So it is something that we are looking at, and I think when I come to the cardiac arrest annual report, our figures on a yearly basis remain under the national norm. So yes, there is work to do, but I think the areas that we really need to highlight and address are listed in that report. So I'll come on to that, if I may, at a later stage.
Yes, of course. Thanks.
So it's an issue we're aware of. It may be in the way it's being recorded, presumably, or but you're not flagging up any particular causes of concern, are you, Fiona?
I think that there are things that we can do to improve our cardiac arrest survival, a much greater focus on the time it takes us to get hands on the chest, and that is around our EMAs in control rooms identifying cardiac arrest. That's not straightforward. It's something that there's a real focus on at the moment. There's also the push to get more bystander CPR so that we can keep people alive until our crews get there. But we know from our operational data that we have seen a gradual decrease in the time it takes us to get to patients in cardiac arrest. It's come down to under 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I move us on to the caring domain? Is that the next one we wanted to consider?
So caring's a tricky one, Chair, because whilst absolutely we acknowledge that it's absolutely of exceptional importance, the historic metrics that we're currently reporting on don't fit within that domain at present. So at the moment, as it says, I think in the front sheet, we're working on the metrics for that domain, and we don't have anything specific to present on it today, but they're a work in progress.
Okay, thank you. The response.
You've got a couple of sections there on. You've got a couple of sections there on complaints, but I would encourage you to also include compliments as well, or numbers of compliments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. The responsive domain.
Thank you, Chair. I'll cover this section, which is effectively our performance response in the main. Now, picking up from Howard's comments, and the board will remember that the previous IPR had a number of different elements in it from a performance reporting perspective, which also included contemporary data as well, showing the running trend of the last 13 weeks, which was helpful to contextualise some of the performance. So in this particular report, what I'm going to do is take you through the, we might call it the performance quick step, because we're going to be looking at pages 8, 12 and predominantly 21, if you have those to hand, which helps to give you some of the context around the performance delivered. I'll also refer slightly to page 9, where we've got some of a sort of verbose response to some of the response performance, just to give you some context. But I think it would be it's really important we recognise that we are looking at the data in May, and we've been on an interesting journey since January in both up and down performance. So the data in May is the first time in certainly my 3.5 years that I've been with CCAM where it's difficult to find comments around exceptions, which is why actually on page 11 that it says none to report, because of the journey we've been on, and that's predominantly around, so we can all see the swathe of green in there. Rather interesting, the on page 8 on your under the safe metric, the top box, frontline hours provided 99.10%. Well, it's a shame that's still red, because it's the best it's ever been, and it would be nice to have achieved 100. But what we have learned through this, and this is the first time CCAM has been able to deliver across the board, and what it's highlighted is what we would class as the sweet spot in the number of hours required to deliver performance. So if I take you to explain what I mean through this journey to page 12, It's the fourth line down in page 12, which relates to again, it's the journey in hours provided for the different months thus far. And it will give you an idea of how 99.1% compares to previous months. Now, you'll see in April, we were at 97. And I would argue, when you reflect on page 21, if you look at page 21, you're looking at now the April and May performance combined. 97% of hours provided is pretty much the Goldilocks zone in hours necessary to deliver performance across the board, because you'll see there we had just a 5-second lag on our Cat 1 mean in April. We've delivered across the board in May. So that gives you an idea of what is necessary in hours delivered to deliver our performance. So you then will say, well, what else contribute? How were you able to deliver such high numbers of hours? And that's because of the experience we'd gone through COVID. Absolutely everybody wanted to come out and get involved. We also had a situation where normally in May, our annual leave would start to increase, and we had the lowest period of annual leave taken in our history during that period. So despite the fact we had a significant number of people out of the workplace in self-isolation and shielding, we had pretty much maximum hours available, because the people that would have ordinarily been either training or on annual leave were still in the workplace to deliver hours. And it's delivering those hours that enabled us to achieve that. It would be fair to say, and we need to prepare ourselves, because the journey since May has not been as successful. And we have been significantly challenged in some of the hours provision for a number of different reasons, predominantly around the discussions we've already had as a board around our making sure our workforce are appropriately protected from a fit testing perspective, and having appropriate respiratory protective equipment that is fitted and appropriate, and the challenges we've had around risk assessments and what that's done to impact the workforce. So we've had some occasions where staff who have been at work have then been risk assessed and now taken out of the workplace because of those risk assessments. So we're having to balance all of that particular aspect. So, as you know, Chair, I can go on when it gets to performance reporting. I would like to take a pause there and ask for questions, if I may.
You always make it sound interesting, Joe. So we never tire of listening to you. You've certainly brought out some key points there regarding availability of staff, etc. So, colleagues, any questions you want to ask of Joe about that section report? But I need to go back to bring in Lucy with the QPS report.
Michael, Chair.
Yeah, Michael, come in first, then Al.
Joe, I think for me, this is the highlight of the report. I mean, I gain a lot of assurance from all the indicators about the performance that we've got. It's this fundamental issue, isn't it, about our longer term resilience? And I don't know what the answer is to this, and it causes me some concern as we go into the winter months. And I expect my specific question is, and it relates to something that Lucy said earlier at another meeting. To get us through COVID, we did some unusual things around reducing training, reducing abstraction and all that. And there's going to be a catch-up period. I know we've done a lot of training online, but what's your thinking about how we get through this? Because it is going to be quite tricky, I think, over the winter months if we haven't got the hours to put on the road, and we've still got other pressures on us around training.
So training's been quite interesting, because we have improvised really well to turn what would have been face-to-face key skills sessions into online development. So from that particular perspective, we've done really well. We had a plan initially, as we went into COVID, you'll recall we had a plan that said we will not do any key skills for Q1. As we started to understand what was happening through April, we realised we could actually start again, and we had a programme to undertake some of that training, which was effectively some taking hours out of the system to do that. Not all of those hours were abstracted. So about probably 17% of the hours to do the key skills was only abstracted. The rest of it people were doing in under an overtime capability. So that helped. Didn't help with spending on overtime, but it helped maximise the hours available on the road. So we have now ceased that programme for the summer holiday period, because this is the traditional period where we've got maximum annual leave, and our annual leave take up at the moment is on a par, if not higher, than last year, which is good, but we've still got that 3-month lag in May, and we also had people. I think we bought about a week off people, didn't we, David, at the end of March? I think, yeah.
So 5 days, Joe. Yeah.
5 days, yeah. So we bought some leave off to stop people carrying leave over, but we will have a real problem at the end of this year and/or into next year, depending on how we deal with the excess annual leave that's been accrued, and it's got some scary numbers to it, hasn't it, David?
Yeah, it's a national issue, to be honest. In that the financial bit is a national issue, because the guidance, if you read it in a certain way, suggests that there's a carryover. And Michael, as you know, as a former auditor, or even an auditor, full stop, you need to account for that in the year, don't you? So
sorry, I don't want to hog this, and I'll just 2 observations, and I'll come up. If it's a national issue, it's a question mark about how far we are accelerating up the chain. And the second point to me is, have we any flexibility around recruitment? Can we accelerate recruitment to increase our available hours? I know that's got challenges and difficulties and around affordability, but that seems to me, other than you using the private sector.
Well, one key benefit is we haven't had the same rate of attrition. Obviously, in this uncertain world, less people have been willing to move on. So we do have a benefit in that we've probably lost only half of the levers we would have expected to lose during this particular period. So that's helped with the pipeline of recruits coming in. But there are other challenges, and some of those other challenges are around, we've got a lot of new starters, certainly NQPs, that still haven't yet got their appropriate C1 driving licence. And that creates a hiatus going forwards, as we've got to get those people through that particular aspect as well. So we have a pipeline that's scheduled to deliver, I think, 169 new staff from June in operations, both newly qualified paramedics and associate ambulance practitioners as well. So that's our key focus on new staff coming in. So it's a fine balance, Michael, but from a pipeline perspective, we can keep recruiting. We have more challenges at the moment in some of the physical aspects of the training, though, as you might imagine.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Joe, I wonder if it's worth saying, sorry, David, to butt in. Joe, I wonder if it's worth saying the OUMs yesterday, I think, when they presented to us at the Executive Management Board, were relatively confident about the recruitment pipeline and the number of staff they will have as we get into Q3. Obviously, there'll still be other issues, as Joe's alluded to, around driving and all of those things that COVID has meant we can't progress as quickly as we would in normal circumstances. But in terms of the actual pipelines and the recruitment processes and so forth, I think they were relatively positive. Joe, is that fair?
Yeah, it is fair. They're positive that they will be knocking on the doors of their establishment numbers, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That is good news to hear, because we've not always had positive news in the past about our recruitment pipeline. So that really is good to hear. Al, you wish to come in then, Terry?
Yeah, thanks. So, and it's fairly brief. I'm not really sure whether it's for Joe or actually for Michael Whitehouse as chair of FIC, really. But we've been through a period of a data-rich environment, with daily reports that we've all seen about the interaction of demand and capacity and a variety of other things. And we've seen it go through a peak of good performance and then back to things we've been a bit more used to as well. And I just think my question really is how we're organising around that so that we really, forensically get to what Joe's described as the sweet spot of demand versus capacity, but actually maybe some of the finer issues within that will shape the way we deliver the service in the future. Are we organised to look at it in that sort of depth?
Yeah.
Absolutely, Al. So we in operations we will look at by operating unit by literally the hours in each hour of the day that they are delivering. So as an example, today we've highlighted that we have a particular pressure today between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and we have mobilised 8 additional double crewed ambulances just using team leaders and other staff that are about in the system during the day that could be doing something else to support that patient care. Because if we can deal with the patient activity as it comes in, we drag less into the evening, which is when we have traditionally lost our performance initiative in the latter part of the day. So we are absolutely focused on every hour in every day in every operating unit and the number of vehicles that we've got out there.
Thank you. Let's keep moving. Terry?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, a bit of a nuclear question really, but it links to whether staff are still willing to do overtime, bearing in mind the pressures they're under. We've seen an increase in referrals to the Wellbeing Hub. That might be due to the pressures, or it might be just due to the fact that the Wellbeing Hub is now considered to be part of the structure of the organisation, so people are much more willing to engage with it. But I wonder if the model that we've used historically, which has had a reliance of overtime built into it going forward, might be less robust. And actually, we've got good workforce projections, we've got good recruitment pipelines. But I wonder, Joe, if the bottom line is moving forward, we might actually need to increase establishment so we become less reliant on overtime, if it is the case that staff actually want to take the option of not completing the overtime hours they have historically.
That's really interesting. Really interesting question, Terry, because I think we are seeing a situation where there is some overtime fatigue. What's interesting is it's also been impacted by some of the colleagues that have been. So we have a number of colleagues that are waiting for small face masks to keep them protected. They appear to also be a lot of colleagues that used to do a lot of overtime as well. So we've got a double whammy in that we're not able to put them on the road to do their contractual hours, and they're unable to do any overtime, and that's a concern for them as well. So we are seeing about half the overtime take up now as we were at the beginning of April. So to give you an idea, we were peaking in April at about 1,600 hours of overtime some days. We're now down to about 800.
Well, that's clearly one we've got to reflect on for the future, isn't it? And I think that's a fair question. I think that both within the workforce committee and in finance and performance, I think we need to make the correlation there between increasing the establishments and affordability and practicality. But I do think that's a very fair point you make there, Terry. And I think Joe's been honest that we haven't quite got the answer yet to that.
Yes, it may be that we've waited 5 years to get a workforce plan that we're all confident in, but actually COVID might have undermined that somewhat. Yeah. And as part of the work of the COVID recovery group, it might be worth looking at a very simple question, that is overtime a reliable way to construct a workforce plan as we move forward? It feels like it might not be, but it only feels like. I have no evidence.
David, you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say the way. Sorry, Joe. Do you want to go first?
Well, that there has been a slightly improved take up of bank hours and a more consistent delivery of annualised hours staff as well during that period. So one does tend to offset the other slightly, which is with bank hours, you'd expect it to, because you'd expect if we can get more bank staff hours out, then it will be less reliance on overtime, but it doesn't fully compensate.
David and Ali, who's been waiting a while. So David?
Yeah, sorry, David. I was just going to add to Joe's comment. So I think, Terry, the reality is we don't rely on overtime heavily in the workforce plan. You know, between overtime and PAP, it's for the peaks in demand as much as anything else. I think our underlying issue is recruiting to the vacancies within the established structure, which is our core element, obviously. So the more recruitment we can do to those established vacancies, those substantive posts, we'll find that our reliance on overtime will automatically be less anyway, if that makes sense. And it's just the continual process. And if we think of where we've come from over the last few years, you know, Joe is closing that gap quickly, but obviously demand goes up, or activity goes up each year as well. So, you know, it's about you need to close the gap much more quickly to keep up, if that makes sense.
And if I may, David, whilst all of that is right, David, and I agree, it may well be that we need to increase the establishment so that through better rostering, we're less reliant on overtime at points of peak demand. Because at the moment, we meet those peak demand points by overtime, not by more sophisticated rostering. And we can only do that more sophisticated rostering if we carry more staff within the establishment.
And that's clearly an issue for more in-depth discussion, I think, of the community structure. Ali, forgive me, I didn't know.
No, I mean, the point that Terry's making, I think, is a really good one. I think the issue, I think, is there's another sweet spot to hit in this, which is, to use Joe's language, which is what is the level of earnings that we need to provide to individual members of staff to make it attractive to work in CCAN, because we work in a high-cost part of the country. So the question here is that people become accustomed to earning a certain amount of earnings to actually survive in the southeast. So when we're looking at that, the rush to get more people at plain rates as opposed to slightly less people with the opportunity to earn more, I think it's going to be one of those delicate balances, I think. And the other one, I think, just a quick comment on Michael's point, which I think you're exactly right, which is I think there is a massive catch-up exercise going on, really, isn't there, in terms of this ebb and flow during the last few months. I think it would be wrong to say anything other than we've seen some seismic shifts, I think, in terms of like the changes in our workforce. You know, we've had, at our peak, we had 400 staff self-isolating. So that is like 10% of the workforce, or a fifth of the clinical workforce. So these are enormous things, and as they normalise again, I think we will have, I think, some issues that we still can't see yet, which are further catch-up activities.
Okay, thank you. Laurie, you wanted to come in?
So I'm just going to make the point that perhaps in WWC, if the overtime continues to be an issue, we ought to do a bit of forward thinking and looking at staff attitudes to overtime to see if we can just get a little more predictability of how much we can rely on it. And we could do that within WWC if people felt it was appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's clearly an area for further work to really understand that. But I think in terms of the performance elements of the report, we can now move on quickly to other matters. Okay, Lucy, can we bring? I should have brought you in earlier at the end of the earlier section from the quality and patient safety point of view. Do you want to give your committee reports?
Yes, I'll give you the highlights. So the first report we have is the 24th of June, which was an extraordinary QPS meeting, which actually we've been holding throughout the pandemic period. This extraordinary meeting was called at the request of the board to seek assurance that we were adequately managing the balance of risk between staff and patients relating to PPE. We received an extremely detailed paper which went through the timeline of decisions and the issues that we have encountered of PPE during the pandemic. We explored that we receive a range of masks, why that is the case and what the consequence of that is. And we also discussed the mitigation in place for staff that persistently failed fit testing. And the timing of the decision, which balanced the risk of staff against the impact of patients, in terms of taking staff off the road that did not have, as we mentioned, particularly small faces. I think as a committee we were assured that there had been grip in this area, that there were things that we hadn't understood, and actually I would be, I was very impressed by how open the paper was in terms of the issues and areas that we need to look at moving forward, and where we didn't understand things going into this, and we now do, because they were challenges that we hadn't faced before. So it was a very open paper, and we came out of that assured that we had taken the decisions that we'd taken in the best way we could at the time we had taken them. And I think there's also been feedback given to the governors, David, around this as well, and particularly the staff governors that had raised concerns. And I think, again, we got positive feedback on that.
Yes, we did. Yes, thank you.
The second part of the committee, which I think dovetails into Beth and David's earlier report on the COVID response management group. Actually, if you look at these items, you'll see they were on Bethan's list of key decisions made from the last board meeting. So you can see how the CRMG and QPS have been working in tandem through this. So we talked about staff testing, NHS test and trace, and working safely during COVID-19. So that is the 24th of June report. Does anyone have any questions on that? No? Good. We then had a full scheduled QPS meeting on the 9th of July. What I would start by saying is it was a really strong set of papers, clearly articulated issues, and showed real progress in many, many areas. The first item was around Eoc Clinical Safety, and this is one of our CQC should do areas, and this is something that we've kept under a close eye over the last years. The committee received a detailed paper setting out the progress of the Eoc Clinical Safety project, and we looked at all aspects: staffing, recruitment, safe staffing procedures, clinical tail audit, and welfare compliance. We were overall assured on the progress that's been made. However, we've asked for a management response on a few areas where we require further detail from that paper, particularly around welfare calls, tail audits on long waits, and timeliness around ongoing reviews. Long waits for non-compliant, and we need to get better timeframes applied to the achievement of the welfare callback plan. So I know these areas are really strong areas of focus, but it really was a very detailed review of this area. We next looked at the current 111 CAS clinical effectiveness, which actually provides a really good foundation for the 111 CAS go live that we're looking to get to October. So this paper explored the different services that we're now providing through the CAS part of 111, and I think does show that we've got those building blocks in place for the 1st of October. We do have a lot of work to fill some of the staffing numbers that we need. We then looked at consent to care and treatment. This was a follow-on from a paper that had been brought in a previous year, and I think, as Fiona said earlier, it's really shown that the EPCR that we've implemented last autumn has really helped move the trust forward significantly, and able to bring that consent to care and treatment into the PCR forms that are filled in on the spot by our workforce. We then looked at clinical outcomes through COVID. We asked to look at this because obviously COVID has provided us different challenges, and we took assurance that we were comparable to all other ambulance trusts and international services based on the data that we were shown. We've got some work to be done to add benchmarking data on the outcome graphs, but we were assured from what we were given on that day. We then went into a couple of papers. The first one was around Pediatrics, and this showed that we're getting a really good level of care being delivered and significant changes implemented in developing the quality of care. Specifically around COVID-19, that we discussed the usual operating procedure to convey all children under 2 years, and was that now sensible given the situation we find ourselves in? And it really is a very excellent paper. Again, we then talked about obstetrics, and you can see the impact that bringing a consultant midwife has had on this area in CCAM. There's been great strides. We talked a lot about the fact that we're getting a lot of transfers to birthing units, and there's a particular issue in Sussex around this. So we've asked for a management response to come back in September around this area. We talked about the cost improvement programmes and the quality impact assessments that had been done. The paper in itself we were assured with, but however, we have asked in future that we can see challenges and rejections that have come back around the QIAs, because that's what shows us the process is working, rather than just being told here are all the tick boxes. So that change will be made moving forward. The board has coming the clinical audit report and plan, and we would commend that to the board. Real positive impact again on technological advances, but having been here many years, it was brilliant to see that we're undertaking audits and then making changes based on the outcome. And that, from someone that's been here for some time, is something that makes you smile. So we have just made such a huge leap in this area. And also Joe and I have spent a number of years talking about health record reconciliations, and spent many a happy paper looking at the numbers, and we're now at 98% of reconciliations of our health records, which again is a huge improvement from where we've been in the past. The cardiac arrest annual report again is on the board, so I won't dwell on it, other to say that we commend it, and that it's clear the team were delighted to be able to produce such a thorough report in this area. And I think I will stop there. Has anyone got any questions on that? Thank you.
Thank you, very comprehensive, and thank you for stepping up to the plate, Lucy, and taking on the chair of the committee at short notice. I think from that report, though, you can see that we're looking right across all areas of clinical quality, and we'll take some assurance from that. So thank you for what you're doing there. Moving on to the well-led aspect of the report.
Thank you, David. So I'll start with finance and strategy, and then Ali will do workforce, obviously. So as the board is aware, and as we've discussed at several finance investment committees, the financial framework for this year is unique in the sense of there is a national block contract arrangement with COVID top-up payments with the aim of bringing every provider and commissioning organisation in at a break-even basis. That's the details which is included within the pack, and I won't dwell on that because, as you'd expect, the results are pretty much the results, and the figures in the pack reflect all of the conversations that we've had today, particularly around operations and COVID costs and so on and so forth. I think there's a couple of things for board assurance that we do probably want to highlight, though. There are two exception reports in the pack. One is around cost improvements. Now, obviously, we are on a break-even trajectory for this year, but within that trajectory, we are still committed to ensuring that we are as productive and efficient as possible with the resources we have available. Not only because that's the right thing to do, but also as we go into next year, we need to keep the momentum going on running an efficient service. So when we go back to normal, whatever that means, contracting, you know, we can demonstrate that we have used the money in a value for money and effective way. I think the other issue we've also got to consider is the amount of cost pressures that the organisation is sharing through the robust processes we have in place. So we are very aware of cost pressures. There are a significant amount, and obviously any new on a break-even basis, if you want to fund a new cost pressure, you have to do that from not spending the money somewhere else, because there is no more money in the simplest terms. So we are managing that at a weekly basis between the efficiencies we can provide in the most efficient way to use the resources, balancing against cost pressures which are coming for the organisation. The governance process around that is robust and actually is led by our senior leadership team who discussed these, and I know did it yesterday again, to make sure that we are not missing anything that's vitally important, and also making sure that everything does align to our strategic goals and so forth and so on. So No escalation other than to make the board aware and just to assure the board that we discuss this at the Finance Investment Committee regularly. I think the other thing for board awareness is that despite assurances from the centre that we would have the framework for the remainder of the year detailed to us in the 3rd week of July, that has not been forthcoming and has been delayed again into August. I'm still waiting for formal confirmation, but it is highly likely through conversations we've been involved with as a region that certainly August and September will continue on the same basis. And we are still waiting for what October onwards looks like to the end of the financial year. The commissioners have sent through this morning that they have again confirmed there is no requirement for us to contract with them for this year. But past that, they haven't declared on what the framework is that we will be receiving our income and being able to reclaim our COVID costs. So that's something we'll take through the Finance Committee as and when that detail arrives. In terms of so that obviously plays into then affordability for the rest of the year, but also sustainability for the following periods and the following years. In terms of strategy and business development, as you'd expect with our COVID response, this has taken a sort of back seat. However, not being completely ignored. So the team still continue to work hard and engage with the system. I think the two areas that are in play at the moment are the whole of the 111 CAS Think 111 area, which obviously we've discussed at length already, and then the potential that patient transport services are likely to come up for tendering towards spring next year. So not one particularly for discussion now, but obviously just to make the board aware that we are in those conversations, and obviously we will respond to them appropriately, having gone through the relevant conversations internally. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think Al's got a question. We'll move on to Ali. Al?
Yeah, thanks. And we're not seeing other hands up to us specifically about what David's just been talking about. One item from the well-led part of the report. I hope this is a good news position. The whistleblowing stats go to zeros for about a year now. I'm hoping that's good news rather than a lack of data in the new report. Is anybody able just to reassure us on that?
Yeah. So my understanding, but from the point of view of reviewing the report, was that that is correct. But obviously the feedback from staff is coming through in different ways. So whilst it's not formal whistleblowing through that process, we're still very engaged with our freedom to speak up champions and guardians, and Kim, who I know has come to the board a couple of times in the last year to share with the board some of the feedback she's getting. So I think the data is correct, but I will double check whilst Ali gives his bit and just confirm that.
Okay.
But I think we're still getting it through another source.
And that's great. And that's a healthy situation if actually we're hearing about things without them becoming a whistleblowing incident.
Yeah. So and I think, in fairness, staff have confirmed to the CQC and to board members that they now feel more able to raise matters which they could not do in the past, or felt unable to do so in the past. So I think we should take some assurance from that, but I think it's one we need to be vigilant on. Thank you for raising that, Al. Ali?
Yeah, just quickly on Al's point first. So just to say, I think we will double check the number, because you see on this chart and this page and the previous page, we've had some decimal place issues. So if I can put it that way. So, but we'll double check on that. But my understanding from talking to Kim as our Freedom Speak Up lead is that the number of cases that are formal in that sense is down, but actually we are intervening earlier with stuff. So that seems to be working quite well. I'm just going to make two comments, actually, because a lot of the two major themes that were in the workforce bit, I think, have been covered off. So one is how we're doing on, what are the two biggest issues? The first one is resourcing. In terms of the pipeline for the rest of the year, that's looking pretty healthy. So, and we heard collaboration of that yesterday from operating unit managers. So that was reassuring to hear it both from corporately and from OUs. I think the other thing that's sort of, if you like, by its side as a major issue is absence levels, and that's caused not just by sickness absence, but also the issues we've also been touching on around self-isolation and absence due to COVID. So that, if you like, is the one that's getting most attention now that we've got our pipeline broadly sorted out. So getting people back to work, getting them back safely. We know that there are, at our peak, as I said earlier, we had 400 people self-isolating. That's around 150 now. We have plans worked out for most people now to come back to work in the coming days, because obviously the shielding arrangements that were in place for a lot of the country, that a lot of that ends as at tomorrow, as we check in the date. So we have several hundred people coming back to work in the coming weeks in terms of our workforce who are out at the moment. And that, I think, is, if you like, the issue that's taking up the most amount of time and the most amount of focus management-wise in terms of getting staff back to work. I'll just make two other quick comments then. So the Workforce Committee had the benefit of having the decimal places in the right place in terms of the rolling numbers. So our annual appraisal rates, in fact, on a rolling basis, are not looking too bad for this time of year. So we're around 70% at the moment. And our Statman training, again, is actually not too bad for this time of the year. We're at 75% at the moment. So I just sort of add to the data that's in this report on those two issues. So that was all from me, Chairman.
Thank you, Ali. That's very helpful. Any questions?
David, I can just confirm from more learned colleagues than myself, we had one whistleblowing incident in June 2019 and nothing since then.
Okay, thank you. Well, I hope that gives us all some assurance that the other processes we have in place for staff to speak up are being followed through. Right, just to finish off before we conclude for a break, just to take the committee chair's view. So, Howard, first of all, from the chair of the Finance Committee, you take your report.
Yep. Okay, just briefly then. The first area was the operational performance, which we've actually covered fairly comprehensively so far, but we obviously looked at that, and we discussed some of the questions that Al had raised earlier on about that, and being clear on the sort of sustainability and structural issues associated with meeting that demand. So we continue to have a close watch on that operational performance. Secondly was the 111 CAS, and I know we're going to cover that a bit later, but I think the team did an excellent job influencing and managing the stakeholders towards a workable solution, because at one stage it was looking very difficult with the IT solution not working, and we've come up with hopefully what looks like a very workable solution, namely that we use our own cleric system, but we also use IT24 and get them to use our system. And if that is the proposed solution, which I understand to be, that's really good news. And I know there's a lot of work going on now to sort of revise the plans on that basis, but it does de-risk it from an IT perspective, which is great news, albeit that there's still a lot of work to do for the 1st of October. So we were assured on that, and I think, as I say, the team did a good job steering that in the right direction. We had a brief update on the estates strategy, but it was only an update. The full strategy is coming into September. We did note the large number of sites that we currently occupy, and that will be looked at certainly as part of that strategy. And then on the COVID costs, we looked at that in a fair amount of detail. We are at the lower end of the COVID costs when we compare to our comparator, benchmark comparators. Which is good from one perspective in that it probably increases the probability of full recovery being at the lower end. On the other hand, we just need to make sure we are capturing all the genuine COVID costs, some of which are not necessarily obvious. Some are obvious, some are not so obvious, but we just need to make sure we're capturing all the extra costs that are rising out of COVID. And then finally, we looked at the fleet business case, and that's coming to the meeting this afternoon. So that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Laurie, you want to move on to your report, please?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief given the time. The first part of the report refers largely to HR processes. So you can see here stuff on e-timesheets and expenses, about insurance. So there are others about driving standards and licenses. And I think the general picture that the WWC saw was one that was actually quite assuring, because all of these HR process issues, or many of them, had a long history within the trust. And there was a feeling, I think, of a much better grip that progress was being made, and progress which had support from the staff side. So it felt really like quite a good picture. On the clinical education side, which was part of the WWC agenda, Philip really has dealt with that very well, and others have. An interesting point that emerged from it was that if we do get really good at apprenticeship, and we think we're getting there, then one of the things to look at was whether we could expand the process to a wider set of roles and functions, which we thought was important to be able to draw people from a wider range of communities into CCAM. So if we got very good at running apprenticeship schemes, then we need to perhaps diversify and think about how we could exploit our abilities further. There's a strategic issue there, which you may have missed, which I think is just worth bringing the board's attention to, and that is we thought we needed a review of relationships with our higher education providers for us to take a little more control, so to speak, to own the process, and to think about how we might subcontract to a smaller range of higher education providers. This would give us, we thought, higher quality in terms of the education, and also probably influence our ability to retain graduates in CCAM's employ, which would have a direct effect, we thought, on performance, hours on the road, and performance. That leads in a way to an issue about, we dealt with a report on diversity and inclusion. It looks a bit dry on the paper here, but I just want to tell you about the strength of feeling that the WWC had, a commitment to this issue of doing more and better, not just for BAME colleagues, but also for people from other disadvantaged communities across our region. And I think it's worth, I'd like to say, just in terms of national recognition, when the WWC met, we hadn't had the award of the national award, but it's worth mentioning, as Meena Chowdhury, who was the architect of that report, did a phenomenal job with it, and I think we're very, very lucky to have her, and the WWC extended their kind of appreciation of what she did. Also hidden in there is quite an important issue about how we look at data for employee relations and workforce issues, and there was a push to make sure that we had that data localized within the trust, so we are able to see how we were doing in terms of each corporate function and across the geography of CCAM. So that might give us a much more granular view about what's going on out there and make it easier to improve. And the last point I'd made, I don't want, if you look at risk 334, which was about culture, we are removing it, not because we're abandoning the issue, but it looked very dated. In fact, I think it's been expressed in the way it was within the report, probably for a few years. So we're really keen on it, so keen we're going to rework a much more comprehensive and modern definition about what we're expecting from that project to change the way we feel as a place to work in the trust. So that, just to reassure you, we're still on it, we're not abandoning it.
Thank you, Laurie, and also Howard. There are no hands raised, and can I respectfully suggest that we adjourn for a well-earned 10-minute break? The next item is the out of hospital cardiac arrest annual report. Fiona, to lead.
Thank you, Chair. I know that we're a little short of time, but I really think that this report does require just a few highlights.
Absolutely, it's above the public as well. Absolutely, please press on.
So I'd really like to commend the work of Dean Rigg, our Head of Clinical Audit, and his team. This is the first time that we've had an annual report, and essentially it means that we've now got a cardiac arrest registry. It means that we have access to epidemiological data, and we also have the opportunity to share with our colleagues in the acute trust the numbers of patients taken to them and the outcome of those patients, and also to share with colleagues in the OUs the number of patients that they have attempted resuscitation on and the numbers who have survived. The report looks at each link in the chain of survival, and for each link indicates how we're doing and what we need to do to improve survival. It also, I think, interestingly, includes feedback from both the family and a particular group of staff, our NQPs, the experiences of both those groups of patients, which I've not seen in a cardiac arrest report before, and does give really interesting insight. We compare our performance against the national data, and you'll see that we're about 1% lower for survival for all comers and about 5% down on the Utstein figures. And we also compare our performance against the 10 steps for improvement outlined in the Global Resuscitation Alliance. The areas that I like to highlight are, from a positive point of view, the really good post-resuscitation care that our patients receive. So if we do get the heart restarted, these patients get a very high standard of care. And for many of those cases, we have CCPs on scene who can provide additional interventions. The areas that I think we need to focus on in particular over the next year are the speed with which we get somebody's hands on the chest to deliver chest compressions when an EMA identifies that the patient is in cardiac arrest, to extend our bystander CPR and access to community defibrillation, and to extend the use of good SAM so that we can get even more people to respond to sudden collapses. And what you can see in the recommendations is that we have listed progress against each of the 10 steps, and for 2 of those we have fully achieved the objective, and for the others there are achievements against all of them but ongoing recommendations. So happy to take any comments or questions, Chair.
Thank you. An excellent report, and can you please pass our thanks back to your team, to Dean in particular, for the work that's been done. It's tremendous. And right, first question is Joe. I think you were first for your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. So Fiona, on page 17, figure 8, we've had a stepped improvement in time to CPR, if I've read that graph correctly. And I just wonder, is there anything within the data that suggests what's led to that improvement in March?
Sorry, 19th. Joe, which page were you on?
Page 17, figure 8.
Sorry, I don't have 2 screens. I have to go through it.
Sorry.
Yep.
So we've seen a consistent improvement in time to CPR commencing, and I just wondered was there anything within the data that indicated what may have happened around that time to create that sustained improvement?
So the figures bounce around quite a lot, and some of the figures for March itself are lower than the national average. So you're looking at figure 8.
Figure 8, yeah, which I read as an improvement because it's faster.
So I'm just trying to think of when we improved staffing levels in EOC.
I see, yeah. So because call handling got more consistent from December last year. So there's been a step change in March, and it's considerably better than so there was a national improvement by the looks of it in the dotted line, but our improvement is even better. And I was just curious as to whether the data may have indicated what might have caused that.
I don't know. And of course, Joe, that's the 90th centile. If you look at the mean time, we haven't really seen any change. There was no particular change in March. And to get hands on the chest at about 5 minutes is an awfully long time. If you look at the GRA figure, they're looking at about 2 minutes. So we've got, I would have said, a 3-minute improvement that we need to make. Now,
can that be explored further, and we'll bring it back to QPS and to the board in due course? I think that's a fair question.
So I think this is around a sustained audit of every cardiac arrest that we do on a daily basis. It's a huge piece of work, but it's something that Dean's looking at.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there's 2 more questions to come. Lucy, I think you were next.
Oh, sorry, I've got my camera off. I didn't realise. On the recommendations, they're very thorough, but what we asked at QPS is that they're prioritised and also have dates put against them, and that we will review them in 6 months' time. Because this is a really excellent report, but there are areas set out here which make big difference to patients. So we want to keep this under watch. So I thought that was worth sharing.
Thank you. Laurie?
I was just going to say, this bit about early defibrillation, it's evident that it really is very dependent on both volunteers and the general public doing their bit. So this is very kind of fits in with integrated care and population health and community resilience. I just wondered if we had an understanding of what we might do as a leader in this area to draw the community and volunteers further into the pathway. I mean, it's an aspiration here. Have we got anything that actually will enact that, so to speak?
So I think we've done a fair bit of rejuvenation of the community first responder pool. Yeah. That was partly around the retraining, and that of course took a bit of a hit during COVID, because we stopped CFRs going to any C1s in fact we stopped them responding full stop, and then brought them back fairly cautiously, firstly to C1 cases, and then more recently, when we felt it was safe to do so, to C2s and C3s. So we've had a tremendous response from our CFRs, and I think we are in a good place to recruit further to those teams.
Yeah, I think, if I can say, I think what you've done with the CFRs is amazing, given where they were and how well integrated they are now. I was thinking more of volunteers more generally and the general public, because they're part of the care pathway too. I mean, an extended care pathway, and whether we had ideas about how, as leading in this area, we might involve them to do even better on early defibrillation.
So I think there is a lot we could do around community involvement. Yeah. We're very involved in the Restart Heart Day, but that's just one day in the year when we go into schools. And I guess there would be a place to see whether our CFRs could get involved, even more involved in local communities. We've other ambulance services have had success in linking in with gyms and leisure centres, and offering to ensure that their defibs were serviced and checked, and that we would debrief after any cardiac arrest, because the individuals who arrest in a gym are generally relatively young and generally have a cardiac arrest of cardiac origin, and there have been a number of really good saves in that environment.
It's just that learning how to do that around this particular area, I think we could use that learning more generally about the community engagement as the world sort of shifts into that population health domain.
Yeah, I think that's something I ask the executives to pick up as we further refine our work in this area. I know our CFRs do a lot of work interacting with the general public in their areas and doing further cardiac arrest training, etc. But clearly there's more we can do there, so we'll put that down as an action. There was other questions to be asked. I think two other colleagues wish to come in.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yeah, please, Michael.
Yeah, very quickly, Ben. I thought it was an excellent report. I just really wanted to endorse Laurie's point about engagement with the community. I know the context is completely different, but I was very struck, was it last autumn, when you arranged for that clinician to come from Singapore. Now, I know Singapore is completely different, but there was some real learning from that I think we could apply, and CCAM becomes a champion and it increases our visibility. So Laurie brought that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we can.
David, it's
yeah.
Al. And I don't want to labour the point any more than other colleagues, but I am certainly agreeing this. Fiona highlighted the thing about hands-on as soon as possible. Can I just draw the link in the board papers with the one on community resilience strategy? And maybe Fiona, to take away from that, the target to create a learning pack that we can put out to the community in that paper actually is for December 21. Yet we're saying this is a critical item, and to maybe double the number of people that do training by 2024. And if it's really critical to us, and I believe it is because of the very mixed nature of our communities, some urban, but a lot of semi-rural and rural, that actually we could be more ambitious with those targets and get more people trained and be on the front foot with it.
Okay, thank you. I think I asked the executives to note that and see what can be done in that area. I think that's a fair point you raised, Al. Any other questions on the cardiac arrest report? Okay, so I think in summary, we can receive what is an excellent report, commend the work that's been done by the team, and this is showing a real how we continue to drive up standards and to examine our practice and offer the public an increased service. And Fiona, you can pass our thanks back to your team for the work that they've done here.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And moving on then to the clinical audit annual report.
So that's me again. I think the areas that I'd like to highlight here is that colleagues will be fairly familiar with the clinical outcome indicators because we report those to the board on a monthly basis. It's actually a huge amount of work. It's around 12,000 patients a year. But for me, the particularly interesting part of this report is the 13 local audits, or the level 2 audits that we've done, which essentially reflect concerns raised in the organisation, areas where we are re-auditing an area of previous concern, and issues flagged up by serious incidents. And I guess the ones of particular interest would be the salbutamol audit, which, although it didn't involve a huge number of patients, was important because we had reintroduced the use of salbutamol for our CFRs, and we wanted to make sure that that was entirely safe, and it appeared that was the case. We audited the use of codeine, which is a drug currently used by our paramedic practitioners. It's a pain relieving agent, and previously we had withdrawn codeine, and Lucy will remember this. Back in the days when we had real problems in tracking our drugs and concerns that a control drug was not always being properly recorded. And the audit on this occasion shows that although there are areas of documentation that we could improve, the use of codeine was well and safely recorded. And finally, the audit I'd like to highlight is the one on anticoagulation or head injured patients who fall and are on anticoagulants. This was an issue that we'd flagged through the serious incident group, just to see whether our staff were recognising those patients, recording their conscious level, and where appropriate, conveying them to hospital. And that proved to be the case. However, none of this work would have been possible if it hadn't been for the improvement in the technology around the EPCR and DocWorks, which has allowed us to really get into the data and produce meaningful reports. And also, as somebody who often has to go in and look at what's happened to a patient in fairly short order, the ability to access an EPCR pretty much as soon as it's been completed has been a really important thing for the Trust. So happy to take any questions or comments, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm delighted to hear about how we've completed the learning loop, as it were, particularly on salbutamol, which was a subject the board spent considerable time on appropriately, and how we've evaluated our practice, which is really good to see. So, Al, I think you were first with your hand up.
Thanks. So, yeah, Fiona, just on the level 2 audit reports, the safety of discharge, where it said that we've had 53% where a conversation's taken place with a senior clinician. And it just made me wonder why it was only around 50% and whether that pointed to anything else like the availability of our senior clinicians, or is it just an education thing to make sure that we do this better in the future?
I think it's all of those things. I think it's important that our non-registered staff do discuss with a registrant before they make a decision not to convey a patient to hospital. We have had issues around the availability of senior members of staff. You'll remember that clinical staffing in the control room was a big issue a year ago, and that has gradually improved. And we're now well staffed in the control room. We are also increasingly looking at having paramedic practitioners out in the hubs and the Ecals that I referred to earlier. So it is now much easier to get hold of a clinician. We have on occasion had an issue that the crew on the scene would make a decision, leave the patient, and then call up in retrospect just to check they'd got it right. So we've got the message out, I think, that they must make that call before they leave scene. But equally, it's up to us to make sure that there's a clinician available to make a timely call, because you can't expect our crews to hang around on scene when they've made what they think is a safe decision.
Sure.
So it's around education and availability.
And I've noted that the report says, you know, that we're getting this right, but it's just that aspect as well. And I think I can't imagine the situation and the short time you've got to make these decisions when you're with the patient. But I'm glad it sounds as if the access is available, and the education to make sure we use it is where we need to head. But thank you.
Okay. Lucy, did you wish to come in?
Yeah, actually, it was about that very point, Al. So it was around safety of discharge, and that did come up at QPS. And we did ask that the next QPS meeting we get a better look at that, because it is a key area both for patients but also for our non-registered clinicians. So
I think that's absolutely right, Lucy. And we've had a number of serious incidents where we flagged up that a non-registered crew have made the decision not to convey. Yeah. So it's a live issue.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Terry?
Thank you. It's a huge improvement, isn't it, from where we were? It's so impressive, this work. My concern is a concern I think I've had for a number of years, really, and that is around compliance. So we've done the audits, we've recognised what needs to be doing, but actually many of our responses are fairly low level. So I was looking particularly at the mental health issues, which is fairly typical, really, where we identify that things aren't being done as they should be. It's on page 22 of the audit, but you could look at almost any of these areas. And what we're doing is we're building a case study and a podcast. I still don't feel the burn on staff to ensure that things happen, so we're not compliant with our requirements under the Mental Health Act, and we have known that for some time. I'm just wondering what confidence executive colleagues have that these fairly low-level actions, and forgive me, but they are low-level actions, that these will have the impact that is required. The level of compliance for our work with mental health patients is far too low. We've known that for a long while. The audit has confirmed it, but it feels to me that the actions we're taking, whilst not inappropriate, are very gentle and very robust. And that seems to be the case for many of the areas where we've identified a shortcoming in our clinical response.
I think that's a fair challenge. Although I would say that the audit did show that the care provided was excellent. I think that one of the issues around this particular group of patients is that the observations that we would require in somebody with a physical complaint aren't necessarily the same as the appropriate observations in a patient with a mental health issue. And I think there is an argument for having an additional set of metrics around assessing mental health patients. But I mean, Bethan's probably better able to comment on this than I am.
Bethan?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So I completely agree with you, Fiona. As we know, whilst, as you say, Terry, this might be low level, it's incredibly complex, to Fiona's point. And we're doing a huge amount of work around mental health. We've done a huge amount of recruitment of experts to try and help with this. We are doing large amounts of training, which we're looking at delivering in new ways to our staff to try and help some of these things. And of course, we're looking at alternative models. So there is a plan in the background, and maybe I think the thing for me there is maybe we haven't articulated that well enough, and happy to pick that up through QPS.
Chair, if I'm also add, that data goes back to May last year. We now have probably 10 mental health clinicians.
12 in the Eoc.
12, thank you. In our multidisciplinary team within the Eoc, and that will go a long way to changing the approach that we take, because there is a resource available for crews to refer to. So it will be interesting to have a parallel audit to see with that resource now in place if that changes anything.
Thank you. Fiona, you want to comment anymore?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to Terry and say that actually his comment around the actions don't illustrate a degree of urgency, and I can, we've said we've done a lot around mental health, but your overarching comment was a lot of the actions that we suggest are a bit low level, and I'm not sure that we've perhaps articulated that many of these findings then get fed back into key skills, which is, well, it was face-to-face, but it's now online training. So a number of these things are picked up in another way. Perhaps we haven't articulated that as fully as we might.
So if I may come back on that, thank you. That's reassuring. The mental health one was a very specific one, but if you look generally at the as a result of this audit, it doesn't feel like we're fundamentally changing practice in the organisation. It feels we're doing stuff, and if people choose to react to it, then all fine and good. So what comes across in the report, as I said, this is a huge improvement from where we were. So this is about making it as good as we can make it. I think we need to be very clear that when we identify that things are not correct, it's not that it's optional for staff to change their behaviours. Actually, it is mandatory for staff to change their behaviours, and putting out podcasts and putting out case studies is all well and good, but people have to react and respond to them. And the line management systems within the organisation, as well as the professional mandate placed upon registered and regulated clinicians, have to be sufficiently robust to change those behaviours. And that doesn't come through. What comes through, I think, in these actions is it's very much a matter of personal responsibility, which I think we would all agree is very important for regulated and registered professionals. But actually, there needs to be some oversight to make sure that where there is not compliance with what we would accept are the best practice processes, that they are reinforced.
Yeah, but I think, as you say, Fiona, I think we can probably express ourselves a little bit more clearly in terms of the actions that have been taken, but also illustrate the success of the audit process, that you've got some objective information of which to have an objective conversation, which we've just had. And can I ask that perhaps the Quality and Patient Safety Committee to work with executive colleagues just to further give us further assurance regarding the matters of our care of our mentally ill clients. But I just to echo what Terry has said, I think that's fantastic progress in the organisation. Thank you for that. Moving on to the learning from.
Yep, that's me again. So the report presented today links into the report previously presented from Q4 2019-20. Because of COVID, we were unable to analyse the data from February and March, so this report completes that. So we've now included all the cases from February and March. And the areas I'd like to highlight are that we saw quite a marked increase in the deaths in March, which is almost certainly COVID related. We saw a massive increase in the number of DNA CPR respect forms. And we also saw in March an increase in the number of patients where a professional decision not to resuscitate was made. And this is an area that we really felt we needed to focus on. Overall, 55 of the 60 deaths that we did structured judgmental reviews on were unavoidable. Of the other 5, we felt, and this is a professional decision or a professional judgment made by senior clinicians, that there was a less than 50% chance of those patients having an avoidable death. The estimate of the care was either good or excellent in the majority of cases. Where we identified poor care, it was generally around a delay in response times, and only one of those did we feel that there'd been a potential impact on the patient, and that was a patient who was in ventricular fibrillation 13 minutes before we got to undertake a resuscitation. So in terms of the recommendations, they have been worked on since then. And the initial one around looking at the professional decision not to resuscitate, our end of life care team undertook a webinar to ensure that there was clarity around DNR CPR orders, respect forms, lasting power of attorney, and how they might make that decision safely. We also are looking to see how we can better support crews when they need to make a decision not to commence resuscitation. And the group is also looking at the record of unexpected versus expected deaths, because in an unexpected death, even if it was a patient who was not expected to survive, we have to involve the police. And that can be quite distressing for the family in a situation where they clearly thought the patient was likely to die. And finally, you won't be surprised that there is work to do on making sure that decisions are well documented, particularly those around talking to another clinician. So happy to take any questions or comments, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions of Fiona? And also, are you happy to support the actions that are proposed? So any questions from that? So thank you. Well, thank you for your leadership in this, Fiona, and again with your team. And the board's are happy to support the ongoing actions. I look forward to a further report. But you're not flagging up at this point any issues of major concern, issues the board need to be aware of.
No, and I think the fact that we felt that the care was good or excellent, and in particular that was around the empathetic manner in which our crews dealt with the relatives, I think is something that we would commend.
Yes, thank you. No, I'm delighted that we know that. Thank you. Thank you.
David, if I'm I think this is terrific to get a report like this. We're in a much better position than perhaps we have been, and all ambulance services in the past. And Fiona, thank you for your verbal update as well, because it addressed actually questions that I might have asked from the paper itself. But important work to continue with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We note that. Move on now to again another important strategy for the board to approve and adopt, our community resilience strategy. Joe, you're going to lead us into this?
I am, Chair. Yes. So before you have the community resilience strategy, which has been a strategy that's been a fairly long time in the making. It's had many opinions expressed upon it, and it has taken various different guises and forms. What you have before you here is the latest release of that, which was produced by David Wells from the who leads the community resilience team, and it's quite important that it wasn't just a CFR strategy. It did encompass all elements of the volunteers that we have working alongside us. So I know there was some questions around the change in format, and what was different, and I believe David has addressed those for the committee. So what you have here is the final draft. I think it would be fair to say some of it is ambitious. It has an ambitious set of actions in it, and I think we will also need to perhaps address the scope and capacity within the community resilience team to address a number of those issues, in particular around the work we've been undertaking around charities, etc. So I think we need to consider having the right expertise within that team, and we need to look at how others have taken to how they're using their community teams, in particular the CFR teams. And I know SCAS have recently had a press release of 40 vehicles they've deployed in support of the community out there responding on behalf of the ambulance service to some of those categories of patients that would benefit from early interventions and early eyes on, who are down the lower acuity scale of incidents. So that's quite an interesting example to be viewing at the moment, certainly from what they've managed to achieve there. So I'll leave it for the board to ask any questions. Before I
come to you, Terry, can I just bring in Lucy from the quality? This has been discussed, the Quality of Patient Safety Committee, and if I recall, has the support of that committee.
On mute, Lucy.
Yeah, you're on mute. Yeah, you're happy to commend it.
It's been discussed over a number of meetings and is commended by the committee. It's a really key strategy. We have very passionate volunteers and we're very lucky, and it's very important that's encapsulated in this. I would say, always want to stretch the mark, Joe, that this covers what the volunteers will do. I think what we now need to address is how we ensure that they can give feedback and get feedback from us into the organisation, and make sure we've just got that governance structure right around it, so that we don't get it coming in at various points, and that there is a coherent way of receiving that feedback into the organisation. So I'll look forward to adding that to the agenda.
Yeah, but vitally important, Lucy, isn't it, that we get a view from all of the community, not just a small cohort of the community, or even a single individual.
Yeah, because it can be disproportionately represented at times. Yeah. I would say as well in here, I think what is really good is the piece around fallers and vulnerable adults, and where our volunteers could really help on that end, particularly where we struggle on our category 3 and 4 performance.
And on that note, I know it was touched upon, I think, by Bethan as part one of the CMG actions. The category 2s and 3s that the CFRs are now going back to, or to responding to, are in fact those incidents where we have vulnerable people on the floor and how we support them. So what we've said was, rather than just go back to doing what we did, let's go back to doing something that we really need, rather than just a blanket response.
Thank you, Terry. Then Laurie.
No need. Lucy said what I was going to say.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie.
I was going to say, I really like this, Joe, the idea that we've looked beyond CFRs doing clinical work with us out into the wider community. And I think the point Lucy just made about people with falls, as I understand it, we've gone back to a project that had been on the back burner for some time now, particularly the one down in Thanet, where we're looking at how we can use volunteers with Age UK to do pastoral work, really pastoral care that actually does better for patients and their families, but also hopefully releases hours of our clinicians back onto the road. So I think we're going to learn a lot from that, and I'm sure that's going to be a much more common feature of how we mesh with our communities than it's been in the past. So I really think you're doing a great job on this. It's important.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I think so in summary, the board can receive the community. Sorry, Michael.
I raised my hand. Sorry, you probably can't see. Can I just make one comment? Building on what other people say, if you want a community workforce to really be effective, it needs to feel obviously valued. So it is important that this work is very much evidence visible to the board. So I'm pleased to see in here that you are talking about a number of performance measures, and you also say that you're going to be developing a management information dashboard, and this will be in place by July 2020. We are already there, so all I would just stress is it is important that there is regular reporting back to the board so that these people who are giving of their time can see that we do take it seriously. We're looking at what they do. It relates to the governance point, but the paper's a little bit vague on how that's going to be done. I'm sure it will be remedied going forward, but I just wanted to emphasise that that is really important. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely important, Michael, and part of those that dashboard is now part of the BI suite of tools that we have access to.
Thank you.
Laurie, do you want to come in again?
No, sorry.
Okay. So in summary, we received with enthusiasm the community resilience strategy and approve it. And I'll ask, in terms of just in relation to that last comment, the Quality and Patient Safety Committee continues to work with the executive to oversee the rollout of the strategy and to offer appropriate support. And I think the board are together on it. I think it's fantastic developments, and we are looking beyond our CFR community, important as they are, to other aspects of volunteering and community engagement. So well done.
David, are we approving? Joe said it's a draft, and there's certainly one or two comments I would like to input to it. Not for a board meeting now, but
yeah, thank you, Victor. I think what I'd like to suggest is we approve it subject to some make some minor amendments which QPS can oversee. But I think if this has been now discussed extensively in the organisation, so I'd like us to move on and adopt the strategy subject to some minor amendments we can discuss at QPS. Are colleagues happy with that? So in headline terms, we've accepted the strategy. We do need to move on with this. Right, let's move on to the other items. The Audit and Risk Committee report, Michael.
Yeah, very, very quickly, because I know we're short of time. I'll do this and the information governance. So we had a meeting of the Audit Committee a few weeks ago. Very pleased to report to the board that we looked at the overall governance around COVID-19. You know, there's been a lot of emphasis in the sector and by central government about the importance that all foundation trusts and all health bodies in receipt of additional money to support COVID-19 are using that money appropriately. We looked at the governance, spoke to internal audit, and I'm very pleased to say that we were assured around the overall governance structure that's been put in place, and that builds on some of the comments that David and Bethan made earlier in this meeting. We looked at internal audit's reports. I think the trust has made very good progress in implementing recommendations from internal audit. There was a backlog in the past. Having said that, there are still a not insignificant number of recommendations that need to be implemented. Fully understand the pressure on the organisation, but really the trust is in control of its destiny here, because I largely regard the situation as this, that where internal audit produces a report, it is for the executive challenge if they don't think that recommendation is appropriate or would really add value or is not cost effective to implement. In cases where the recommendation has been accepted, it is really incumbent on the executive team to ensure that those recommendations are implemented. So we really do encourage and expect that to be taken forward, and we got that assurance from Philip. My experience in other organisations is there are two usual scenarios. One is the executive really embrace the recommendations, or it is left to the secretary, to the audit committee and the board to chase up implementation. I'm not sure where we are on that. You know, the benefit of the doubt is very much that the executive take ownership of them, and I hope that is the case, and that we take it forward. Largely because internal audit costs us money, and as well as the insights that they provide, it is important that we do act on that. If I go on to the next issue, which is around information governance, the board has the annual information report for its consideration and approval. Just to remind people that this is about how we discharge our responsibilities from a governance perspective to ensuring that all aspects of information that we have access to and we use is protected and complies with important legislation. We took assurance that that was the case, but we do acknowledge that as CCAM continues to develop its role, particularly in relation to 111, we have increasing access to patient information. We are increasingly vulnerable, like a lot of organisations, to cyber attacks. So it is important that we are not complacent. I'm not saying that we are, but we just need to be alert that this is an increasingly difficult area which all organisations have to face, and it's unlikely to go away. But I would commend the information assurance report to the board. The final thing that we spoke about was risk management. This is a really interesting one because my take on drawing on wider experience outside CCAM is that we have a considerably high number of risks on our risk register, and there's always a balance to be struck here. Some of the risks that we have I would regard as things that we should be addressing through good management practice drawn on considerable experience and leadership. If risks stay on the risk register for too long and they are what I would regard as a management activity, it can have a perverse impact. It means that people just refer to the risk register, oh, this has been managed, and it goes further down the chain of importance. So the challenge that we put to the executive was, have we got that balance right in terms of risks that are real risks on the register and those that are more appropriate to day-to-day management? I was grateful to Beth and David because they provided wider perspective and explained that the risk register arose and developed out of the situation that CCAM faced itself in 3 to 4 years ago, and it is still work in progress, and that the executive team are looking at the risk register and how it would continue to develop. We very much support that direction of travel. I think David, as chair, raised the right challenge that some risks need to remain because they are so key to CCAM's performance. I accept that. What I would say is that the quality of risk management often reflects the maturity of the organisation and its leadership. So it is a good indicator to other organisations looking at us, our regulators, as to how good and how we exercise appropriate leadership in response to risk management. So I'm just saying here is this is something that we would want to see continue to develop. And I was pleased to get assurance from Bethan and David and Philip that that was the case. Chair, that's all I wanted to say in relation to the audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very helpful indeed. Colleagues, any questions or comments on that? So I think we can receive the audit and risk committee reports and the annual information governance annual report, just with a note from the board to the executives to encourage the diligence in follow-up to make sure we complete the audit cycle, as it were, so we don't miss an opportunity. But at the same time, everyone recognises the work pressures people have been under, particularly during the COVID outbreak. And it's fair to say there's been a still continued diligence on matters of audit. So we are grateful for that, but ask to continue to make sure we do follow up. And the comment you make about the refinements to the risk register, duly noted, and we'll ask that to be progressed again by the executive with oversight from the audit committee, that we get a more realistic risk register and leaving other more day-to-day management issues to be followed up in an appropriate way. So thank you for that. Moving on to the BAF risk report, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few things to say by way of introduction to this, and then I'll just take you through the recommendations in section 4. So colleagues, board members will be now familiar with the structure of the report, and like with committee meetings, this item is deliberately toward the end of the board agenda, because it helps as a marker to demonstrate the extent to which the board and its committees are focused on the key risks to the trust. In other words, we use the BAF to focus agendas rather than looking very specifically at the specific reports in the report itself. And I had this discussion recently with RSM, who've just recently concluded an internal audit review on risk and the BAF, and they commended the approach, and that report will come to the audit committee at its next meeting in September, so that's positive. Section 3 illustrates, just to the point I made, how the committees have arranged their agendas to reflect the current principal risks. And this is set out in this report to the board for assurance purposes. And I think just reflecting on the discussions we've had today at this meeting, I think we've seen how this all links together. So the Chief Exec in his report started to talk about areas that link through the IPR to the committee reports and finally to this BAF report. So I think that thread is quite assuring. The risks, though, by their nature are dynamic, and in section 4 we've listed some recommended changes. 3 risks to actually come off the report, and the Chief Exec mentioned in his first item the excellent call handling that we maintained through this pandemic, and as Joe said in the IPR, that's been maintained now, meeting or exceeding the standards since December 2019. So we're suggesting, to Michael's point, in terms of having risks too long on the risk register, that applies to the BAF risks too, that we remove that risk. Ditto with the IG risk, and we just heard about the controls that have improved through the annual report and the scrutiny item that the audit committee looked at in its meeting earlier this month. So we're suggesting that risk comes off the BAF risk register. And then finally, as Laurie mentioned in his WWC escalation report, there's some work to do on how we're approaching improvements in our sort of wider culture. And so we're closing down, we're proposing to close down the culture risk and then redevelop that in due course as set out in that report. The other changes are just in terms of risk scoring, and I won't go through those in detail, but they're set out in the report itself.
Peter, thank you for simplifying our complicated world and how it all reflects through to the BAF reports. It's much appreciated, I can assure you. Can I just check with colleagues, are you happy to accept both the reports and the amendments proposed, the actions we proposed? Yep. Philip, do you want to comment?
Yep, I think the closure of those is very sensible and just follows what we've been doing with the other risk registers.
Okay, thank you indeed. So we can accept the reports and accept the amendments.
Lucy's hand's gone up, David.
I'm sorry, Lucy, do apologise.
I just had on the risk 579 care and treatment, which is around response time and clinical resource. It doesn't specifically fit in there, but it feels that's gone down quite significantly given the issues that we still have around welfare calls and the clinical tail audit. So I know that's not specifically that, but it does come with it. So that would be my only challenge to that one.
Okay, I mean, it's with all these things in terms of risk scoring, it's a bit of a judgment call, and we had the discussion, Bethan, didn't we, about this?
We did, and yeah, so Peter and I met about this, Lucy, and it's because of the point in time we are actually welfare calls. So whilst I absolutely agree, and we discussed at QPS, we have not fixed the overarching issue to 100% compliance yet. We are in a much better place than we have ever been with welfare calls. And now part of that is due to circumstance, and we accept that. But because of that circumstance, we have lowered that risk. So it's still obviously a really high risk. It's still a BAF risk, and that doesn't detract from any of the work around it. But we did lower it to reflect the improved performance, particularly around that welfare call area at the current time. But yeah, we had a long discussion about it, didn't we, Peter? And that was what we came up with. But I completely accept the challenge, and it's a difficult one because I agree the underlying issue is not quite there yet.
Okay. So perhaps at that time, it just feels like it's maybe just gone a bit too far.
Yeah. And actually, Lucy, you know, it's 4 points, but the way that the scoring matrix works, it's just luckily it moves by 1 point that brings it from a 16 to a 12. So it's just it's just the way the scoring matrix is.
Right. Okay. Well, but the important thing is it's still subject to significant scrutiny and discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's to note that, and we ask you to keep that under review, and we'll pick it up at the audit committee in due course. Okay, can we conclude on that item? Thank you for the work that's been done. We have the Charitable Funds Committee reports and terms of reference. Michael?
Yeah, very, very quickly, Chair. People may court that when the accounts were approved and audited for the charity fund the last financial year, in the governance statement we made reference, or the report that goes with the annual accounts, we made a clear commitment to review the governance of the charity fund. This arose from two issues that had been very well highlighted by Al and my predecessor Angela, which was largely around the visibility of money that might be raised by community first responders using the under the banner of the CCAM charity. And there was also a related issue around those community fund first responders who had their own charities registered separately. I'm very grateful to the executive team for the work that they've done to look at the procedures that we have in place, which have been enhanced to try and address these issues. So we've got the terms of reference here for the charity committee and also the rules and procedures that should apply. Of course, rules and procedures are only as good as they are complied with, and we recognise that we need to secure the engagement of the community first responders who do an excellent job in raising money as part of the charity. So David, as chair, will be convening a meeting, I think, with the governors responsible, or lead governors, in relation to the charity. And the proposal is, once we've discussed this with them, we would follow this up with a positive, constructive letter, probably from David Hammond to each of the local branches, if that's the right word, just reminding them of the procedures and processes that we have in place and the importance of compliance with these, particularly around the visibility of funds that might be raised under the CCAM banner. This is really to ensure that that we operate consistently with the requirements of the Charity Commission. The committee also considered money that has been specifically raised in response to COVID, and we were assured that appropriate controls were in place. The only point that we made was it is important to all those who have contributed charitable funds in relation to COVID, that there is clear visibility about how this money has been used to the benefit of CCAM people and those who we serve. So I would recommend the board accepts the revisions to the terms of reference and also the policies and procedures that would govern how we operate our charitable part of our activities. David Hammond was there as well, and I'll just check, David, whether that's a fair summary.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, an exceptionally fair summary, and I think we've moved it forward. I just had one further point, if I may, Chair, which was just for the board to note and thank Katie Splendiff, who is our membership manager normally, but Katie's been doing an incredible job of making sure that we are accessing as many charitable funds through the COVID NHS Together charity and so forth, and then making sure they're distributed to staff appropriately. So I think just to note Katie's excellent work in this would be.
Thank you, David. I should have done that, and I fully endorse that. It was very evident in the quality of the papers that were provided. Thank you.
But I think I'm going to say the excellent work that Katie's done is and the fact that our public visibility and our standing in the public has increased significantly over the last 4 to 5 months since the COVID emergency. Why we must give us, not only ourselves, but the public assurance that any money that's raised is being used appropriately and is governed correctly. So why it's important that the board accept these proposals. Ali, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just a brief one. It was for Michael, really. I think, Michael, are you happy that the common thing that happens with these things is that people get accused of sitting on charitable funds? Are you happy that we're not doing that?
Yes, no, I don't think we are sitting on them. I think sometimes it can be slow sometimes to utilise effectively, and that's often because of the process and that you have to go through. my experience of working with charities, it is important that people see what has happened to the efforts that they have invested to raise money. So I think it's an area we could make more progress in. I don't think it's a control weakness though as such.
We are dealing with modest sums of money here at the moment anyway. Al, you want to go in?
The work that Katie's been doing is very much also looking at talking to staff at all levels in all parts of the trust about the way the charitable funds can help them as well. So I think we're better placed at doing it than we've ever been, but it has been slow, arguably in the past. But we've got the opportunity now to spend it well.
Thank you. So can I, from what I heard, then we can accept the recommendations in the report, and we feel assured of the work that's been undertaken and approved the new terms of reference. Okay, we're all happy with that. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the Appointment and Remuneration Committee report, Al.
Yeah, really briefly. I think this is an unusual one. The NEDs are familiar with the workings of the ARC, and there's an opportunity to assure our exec colleagues on the board that CCAM is in the best place it's been for a while in terms of having a systematic approach to all the things that you can see we've covered in recent weeks and months on succession planning, structure and size and composition of the board, fit and proper purpose and testing, review of appraisals and exec remuneration, putting us in a stronger position to be a responsible employer generally, and for the sake of the execs here, your responsible employer as well, and we'll continue to do things in a systematic way in the future.
But I think, Al, it's also important we assure the public, because a lot of stories and myths regarding the way in which health executives are remunerated. I think it's important that there is a governance framework around this, and as a board we stand to support our executives to make sure that they're remunerated appropriately and fairly. So thank you for your leadership in this.
Responsible employer in the first instance, yeah.
Okay, so we're happy to accept that report.
Thank you, yes.
Thanks indeed. Are there any other items of business that we need to transact? Peter, are you aware of any?
No, Chairman, but other than to say that from the board, unless things change and we're all in the same room, but I doubt it, by the next meeting in September, we'll arrange teams such that members of the public who want to physically attend through Teams, we can invite them to do so.
Thank you. That's important to make sure we keep up the being open and accountable. But also, I think it's really realistic, given where we are with the COVID situation. That's the chief executive able to assure me otherwise. I think we are into this remote working for some time yet, and why I commend earlier the work that the executives are doing in supporting our working from home colleagues and making sure that they're supported accordingly. And we will need to continue to refine this way of working going forward. I think we've got the challenge. The vaccine will not be here just yet, I think, so we need to remain focused in the way we're working. Meeting effectiveness, other than the fact we're 17 minutes over our 1 o'clock deadline, which I regret, but we've transacted a lot of business. Are there anything else that you want to make comment on about meeting effectiveness?
Chairman, just to reinforce what I said under the BAF report, I thought this meeting was really telling, actually, just reflecting the how joined up it was in terms of the items, and I think perhaps the IPR might have helped that in terms of how it was structured.
Yes, I think that's certainly we can certainly learn from that as well. And Cheryl, while you're online, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there any comments you wanted to make? Just I hope you found the last 3¼ hours a good use of your time.
I have, thank you very much. Yes, awfully sorry about my clumsy introduction there into your meeting and the IT problem I've had. But no, it's been interesting, and on the point of whistleblowers, I've not had anything about CCAM in months.
In months?
Not years. Yeah, nothing negative at all from anyone. Only in relation to private ambulance providers where there's been a link, but it's never been about CCAM per se.
Okay, thank you. that's good to have that
That's good to
reassurance
hear,
from you.
Cheryl. Was it the private ambulance stuff about the fact that they were losing their jobs?
Oh no, it was no, it was issues with a provider. There was a whistleblower saying that you were using them and they were doing
the issue
dodgy
you're
things.
cited on, Philip, already. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was just checking I knew about it.
Yeah, you did. You definitely do. Yeah.
Okay, so we can. I think we can safely conclude the meeting, and thanks all for their contributions to, and let's say a comprehensive set of papers, which was extremely well put together. So we'll conclude the public meeting now.